A German shepherd was found guarding a silent girl. What they uncovered broke everyone's heart. It started with a phone call. A ranger had found something unusual, something he could barely put into words. A child, no older than 7, sitting silently at the base of a hill, and beside her, a dog. Starving, limping, but alert standing guard. She wouldn't speak. He wouldn't leave. What began as a routine rescue spiraled into something deeper, darker. A mystery tied to missing reports, abandoned cabins, and a girl whose silence wasn't just trauma. It was protection. But the truth didn't come through words. It came through a bark, a look, and a loyalty no one could explain. Chapter 1. Scene 1. The gift nobody wanted. The truck pulled up to Ravenhill Estate just as the fog rolled in from the hills, soft and slow like breath on a mirror. It was an old utility vehicle, paint chipped, muffler coughing so out of place against the wrought iron gates and manicured hedges that the guards reached for their radios without thinking. But the driver waved a letter high through the window, bearing the seal of the mayor's office. That stopped them. Inside the truck's steel crate, behind a locked cage door, sat a German shepherdaging, battered and still. His name, according to the hand-scrawled form clipped to the crate, was Bramble. No one greeted the animal with warmth. A few of the groundskeepers exchanged glances as they unloaded him. The older ones looked twice at the white fur around his muzzle and the long, jagged scar tracing from brow to jaw. The younger ones stepped back when Bramble's eyes met their Stow's unnerving gold-flecked irises that seemed to see straight through people, not at them. "Why would the mayor send that?" one of them muttered. No one answered. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply stood when the door opened, head held high, tail still, body taut, with a kind of discipline that said he wasn't a pet. He was trained. He was waiting for orders, but none came. They walked him-leashed and wary up the long gravel path past the hedges, the stone lion statues, and the still fountains. Ravenhill stood like something from another century, all dark windows and ivy, tall as a cathedral and twice as quiet. Bramble didn't flinch, not even when the heavy doors creaked open. Arthur Vale waited in the front hall. Even now, past 70, he cut a tall figure, broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed, with silver hair combed back so precisely it gleamed under the chandelier light. He regarded the dog like he regarded most people, with a mixture of detachment and disdain. "The mayor's gift," said the butler, Mr. Halverson, offering the folded letter on a silver tray. Vale didn't take it. "Of all things," he murmured, eyes lingering on the dog's battered face. "Is this supposed to impress me? Win me over?" The butler didn't answer. He had long ago learned not to. "A dog," Vale repeated, as if the word itself offended him. "And not even a proper one. It looks half broken." The room fell silent. Bramble stood still, ears alert. And then, just once, he made a sound. Not a bark, not a growl. Something in between. Low, guttural, like a warning whispered through clenched teeth. Everyone froze. But Arthur Vale, after a heartbeat, smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, but in that way men smile when challenged, and they enjoy it. "Fine," he said. "Let it stay. I've dealt with worse beasts in suits." And with that, he turned and walked away. No one wanted the job of settling the dog. So it fell to the newest maid, a quiet girl named Eloise, who'd only arrived 2 weeks earlier. She said little, moved quickly, and did her best not to be noticed, which made her perfect for tasks no one else wanted. She was the one who brought Bramble into the side wing where unused guest rooms had been hastily cleared. The bed was too big, the blanket stiff, the light weak. It smelled like polish and time. Bramble sniffed once, then sat, facing the door. Eloise watched from the hallway. "He won't lie down," she said, her voice soft, as if speaking too loud might offend him. "He doesn't need comfort," Halverson replied from behind her. "Only obedience." But Eloise wasn't so sure. That night, when the mansion had gone still and the wind curled around the eaves, Bramble remained upright, always facing the door. Occasionally, he stood and paced 3 slow steps forward, 3 steps back like a soldier on patrol, and then, Without warning, he stilled. The clock in the hall had just struck 2. He tilted his head slightly, ears twitching, nose raised, and growled. Not loud, but long and low. It was the kind of sound that drew goosebumps up a person's arms. The kind of sound you didn't question, you just listened and looked and waited for what came next. The next morning, the staff whispered. "He didn't sleep at all," someone said. "He's not a dog," someone else replied. "He's a shadow in fur." Only Eloise dared approach him. She brought him food, which he didn't touch, water, which he sniffed but left untouched. But when she sat near the threshold, just far enough to respect his space, he looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, Eloise saw something beneath the stare. Sadness. Not fear. Not aggression. Sadness. Old and quiet. Like someone who'd seen too much and was still watching. She whispered, "What happened to you?" The dog did not move, but somehow she knew he'd heard her. When the mayor called 3 days later to ask if the dog had been useful, Vale only replied, "It hasn't bitten anyone yet. I suppose that's something." Then he hung up. Outside, Bramble stood in the garden, unmoving, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Shuttered door on the east wing, half swallowed in ivy. Its frame warped, its handle rusted. No one had opened it in years. But that night, just past 2 a.m., Bramble stood before it again and growled. The Ravenhill estate did not know how to breathe with a dog in it, especially not a dog like him. Mr. Whitlock had seen his share of strange guests, from icy diplomats to trembling musicians fallen out of favor with the public. But Bramble was different. He was not a guest. He was not a servant. He was something else entirely, an entity that moved with purpose and stood still with suspicion. The first morning after Bramble's arrival, the head butler stood near the glass corridor facing the garden, watching as the old German shepherd paced the gravel path without direction. His gait was slow but steady, with a kind of reluctant grace, like a soldier still marching long after the war had ended. Sunlight caught the patchwork of scars along his flank and the rough skin just above his right eye, as if life had tried many times to erase him, but failed. Whitlock adjusted his gloves, the way he always did when unsure of a situation. He hadn't touched a dog since 1983. The staff gave Bramble a wide berth. Marie, the young maid with a kind heart, had tried to set out water for him earlier, but Bramble had looked at her, not barked, not growled, just looked, and she had stepped back, visibly shaken, muttering something about his eyes, like they didn't belong to a dog at all. Whitlock turned from the window and moved down the hall toward the east wing. As he passed the old wooden door at the far end, the one that had not been opened in over 15 years, she paused. So did Bramble. The dog was already there, sitting in front of the door as though he'd been waiting. No one had let him in. No sound had called him. And yet there he was, still and watching. The butler's breath caught. The door was older than most people remembered. It led nowhere, they said. A dead wing, forgotten, like a sentence left unfinished. Yet Bramble's ears had perked up, and a low, almost inaudible growl rumbled from his chest. Whitlock stepped closer. "Is there something there, boy?" he asked, more to himself than to the dog. Bramble didn't answer, of course. But he didn't move either, just stared at the seams of the door, nose twitching slightly. The growl stopped. The tail didn't wag. This wasn't excitement. It was memory, or something deeper, instinct without joy. That night, the estate seemed to breathe differently. The staff had retreated early. No one lingered in the halls like they used to. The fireplace in the drawing room was left untended after supper, even though the night was colder than usual. Vale had retired to his study, the way he always did, where he sat alone with old books and a glass of something sharp that never warmed him. Whitlock moved through the corridors with the quiet precision of a man who'd spent his life managing shadows. He checked the locks, closed the curtains, dimmed the lights to the exact degree preferred by his master. And then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't a voice. Not at first. More like a breath, a flutter, the kind of thing you only hear when everything else is still. Then came the sob, soft, fragile, like a child crying into her own hands. Whitlock froze near the foot of the east wing stairs. It stopped. He waited, pulse ticking in his throat. Then, another. This one shorter, cut off, as if someone had covered a mouth with trembling fingers. He turned toward the corridor leading to the old wooden door. Every step he took was slow, deliberate, almost involuntary, as if the house itself resisted motion in that direction. When he reached the hallway, he found Bramble already there. The German Shepherd was standing now, head low, eyes locked on the same door as earlier. His fur bristled slightly, ears pivoted forward. He wasn't barking, he wasn't growling, but there was tension in his frame of readiness, like something ancient had stirred inside him. Whitlock opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. The crino, a whisper, now seeped through the cracks of the door again. Then, nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels colder than sound. He stepped forward, hand brushing the doorknob, but it was locked. The old kind of lock. Not one you could pick easily. Not one meant for quick exits. Behind him, Bramble let out a huff of breath. Not a complaint, not a protest, a warning. Whitlock turned slowly to the dog. "You heard it too, didn't you?" Bramble sat, still watching the door, as if he had been watching for years. The butler remained there for a long time, his hand resting just above the brass knob, eyes fixed on the peeling paint. He remembered faint stories fragments, really of a scandal long buried, of a maid who disappeared without notice, of something whispered about a child. But they were old rumors, buried in snow and time. Still, the cries had been real. He looked back at Bramble. "I suppose you were brought here for a reason?" he said softly. The dog blinked once. Nothing more. Down the corridor, the last candle flickered out, and the house exhaled again, low, uneasy. The storm outside had long since drifted into silence, leaving only the soft whisper of wind curling around the eaves of Ravenhill Manor. Midnight had passed, and most of the estate lay steeped in sleep save for one figure moving through the dim corridors with careful, measured steps. Mr. Whitlock held a brass-handled lantern in one hand, the other clasped tightly behind his back. He moved like someone retracing familiar grief, his spine erect but shoulders slightly bowed, worn down, not by time, but by quiet things unspoken over the years. His eyes, still sharp despite the lines that had crept into their corners, followed the trail left in Bramble's wake. The dog was there again, just as he had been the night before. At the far end of the east wing, before the old door no one used, Bramble stood with his ears forward, body rigid, tail lowered. His nose hovered just inches above the ancient keyhole. Then, with a sound too soft to be called a growl, Bramble pawed at the bottom panel, his claws clicking softly against the aged oak. Whitlock stopped a few feet behind, watching. The lantern cast a golden halo onto the dog's coat, revealing old, scarsome, long faded, some jagged and recent. There was a tremor in Bramble's body, not from fear, Whitlock realized, but from focus. The dog wasn't panicking. He was listening, waiting, and something on the other side of that door had his full attention. Again, Whitlock whispered to himself, "Always this door." He stepped closer. Bramble looked up at him, his eyes catching the light, deep pools of something ancient and knowing. It wasn't the stare of a guard dog. It was older, sadder, something more primal. Then, as if giving a silent warning, Bramble laid one paw on the base of the door and let out a single quiet huff. The butler crouched beside him. A trail of fresh claw marks scratched shallow grooves into the wood, too deliberate to be random. Whitlock touched one with a gloved finger, felt the dust crumble at its edge. The scent hit him then faint, but distinct. Mildew, old wood, and something else. Metallic, like rust. No, not rust. Blood, maybe. Faded with time, but not gone. He looked at the hinges. No light came through. No draft. The door had not been opened in years. Perhaps decades. Bramble sat back on his haunches, tail swishing once across the floor before curling beside him. His breathing slowed, but his gaze never left the door. Whitlock stood, adjusting the lantern. Its glow caught the edge of an old painting beside the door, an oil portrait of a woman with hair the color of mahogany, and a gaze that seemed halfway between joy and sorrow. There was no nameplate beneath it. He hadn't noticed that before. The floor creaked behind him. Startled, Whitlock turned, but it was only the wind, pressing against the leaded glass windows at the hallway's end. Still, he felt it, a presence, the strange sensation that the house was holding its breath, that the silence wasn't empty, but filled with something just outside the range of understanding. Like standing on the edge of a lake at night and hearing ripples but seeing nothing move, Whitlock lowered the lantern and looked at Bramble. "You're not mad, are you?" he asked softly. The dog's only answer was another low huff, his eyes shifting briefly toward the staircase behind them, if suggesting they leave now. Whitlock did not argue. By morning, the tension that clung to the east wing had receded, swallowed by the routines of the day. Sunlight spilled across marble floors. The scent of bread drifted from the kitchen. And Bramble lay curled in the main hall, near the grandfather clock, his ears twitching in his sleep. But Whitlock's mind remained in the corridor. He took his tea alone in the service pantry, seated at the long wooden table where the staff used to gather before the estate grew so quiet, so cold. He stared at the rim of his cup, thinking of the door, of the smell, of Bramble's silent insistence. He'd worked for Arthur Vale for over 20 years. Long enough to know that every estate, especially those built on wealth and silence, had ghosts. But Vale didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in power, in ownership. That's what troubled him most. If there was something behind that door, something the dogs sensed, something once locked away and forgotten then, it hadn't been placed there by mistake. Someone wanted it forgotten. And Bramble, for reasons no one yet understood, had remembered. Later that afternoon, Whitlock found himself summoned to the study. The summons came not through words, but through that familiar ring of the belfry short chimes, meaning now. Arthur Vale stood at the hearth, staring into the fire, though it was mid-June. His posture was crisp, military even. The man never slouched, never blinked too long. He gestured for Whitlock to pour the cognac. Even though it was barely past noon, Whitlock did so in silence. "She's a strange animal," Vale said finally, motioning toward the window. Bramble lay just outside the glass, half asleep in the sun. "He's a he," Whitlock corrected quietly, then added, "And yes, he is. Doesn't bark, doesn't play, doesn't even eat much." "Perhaps he needs time," Whitlock replied. "He's seen things. Dogs don't see things. They react." Whitlock said nothing. Vale turned, eyes narrowing. "Do you find him unsettling?" Whitlock considered the question for a long moment. Then carefully, "I find him aware." Vale stared at him for a beat too long, then turned away. "Have the east wing cleaned this week. That old section smells like death." Whitlock froze. "Yes, sir," he answered finally, though his hands had gone cold, because he hadn't told anyone about the smell. Not yet. The morning light had no warmth at Ravenhill. It spilled pale and slow through the tall windows of the west corridor, falling in long, silent shafts upon the marble floor, untouched by time, yet haunted by it. "Mr. Whitlock stood quietly beside the grandfather clock near the servants' stairwell, hands clasped behind his back, the tips of his gloves brushed with dust. He had not slept. All night, the scent lingered. Not perfume, nor pipe smoke, mildew, and something else older than water, older than wood. He adjusted his cufflinks, took a slow breath, and turned toward the kitchen wing. It was still early. The staff would not yet be at full motion. But there were questions, and he had spent too many years at Ravenhill swallowing the uncomfortable ones. Bramble's warnings were not of the trivial kind. "Miss," Harrow was already stirring porridge in the wide cast-iron pot by the time he entered. Her knotted hands moved slowly, rhythmically, as if the motion was older than she was. She looked up through her smudged spectacles and offered a faint smile, softened with fatigue and something deeper resignation, perhaps. "Morning, Mr. Whitlock," she said, voice thick with sleep and smoke. "Morning, Harrow. May I have a word?" She gave a nod and wiped her hands on her apron. They stepped toward the pantry, where the sound of simmering oats could no longer follow. "I wanted to ask you about the east wing." The smile faded from her face. For a moment, she simply looked at him, her eyes slightly cloudy, but alert, still able to read silence when it was speaking too loudly. "There's nothing to ask, sir," she replied, almost kindly. "Hasn't been used in near 20 years. No staff cleaning rounds? No access? Locked since Master Vale's first wife passed. None of us have been in since. Whitlock frowned. And the key? She shook her head. If there was one, it was buried with the past. Whitlock studied her carefully. What about the sound? A beat of silence. Her eyes drifted, ever so slightly, toward the narrow window that looked out into the orchard. The branches were still bare, as if waiting for a season that might never come. I've been here too long, Mr. Whitlock, she said softly. Some sounds, they don't echo from the hallways. They echo from people. Is that what you believe it is? Miss Harrow pressed her lips together. I believe it's not our place to dig at what's already been buried. The house remembers. That's enough. Ivy was folding linens on the terrace level when he found her soft-voiced, barely 20, her apron too clean for someone who'd been in the estate more than a month. She startled slightly when Whitlock cleared his throat. Sir, sorry, I didn't hear you. No harm done. May I? He gestured toward the bench beside her. She gave a polite nod, moving the stack of white sheets aside. Ivy, I understand you've only just begun your time here, but I'm curious. Have you ever been near the East Wing? She paused, hands still on the linen. Her eyes flickered briefly, then returned to the sheets. No, sir. No? I was told not to. It's not part of the cleaning rotation. And you followed that without question? She looked at him, then truly looked. There was something uncertain in her eyes, but not fear. It was something quieter, a knowing that didn't have words yet. I heard something my first week, she whispered. I didn't say anything. I thought it was just the wind. What did you hear? She swallowed. A knock. Like someone knocking once. Then nothing. Just cold. Cold? She nodded. I had to wear gloves inside. I thought the heating was broken, but Miss Harrow said the house does that sometimes. Whitlock nodded slowly, weighing her words. Then he asked gently, Do you believe the house does that on its own? Ivy hesitated, then whispered, I think Bramble knows more than any of us. Later that evening, Whitlock stood before the east wing door again. The wood was worn, but solid. It bore no plaque, no adornment, only time and silence. He ran his gloved fingers along the edges, then lowered his hand. No keyhole, just a brass handle and the faint outline of an old key plate that had long since been sealed over. He stepped back. Behind him, Bramble stood motionless, silent, and alert, eyes fixed not on the door but on something beyond it. His ears twitched slightly. He didn't growl this time. He didn't bark. He waited. Whitlock inhaled slowly, then turned and walked back into the hall. The door had no key, but perhaps the silence did. The storm rolled in just after supper, low clouds dragging their bellies against the treetops beyond the orchard, wind tugging at the eaves of Ravenhill like an old ghost trying to get back inside. Ivy was in the pantry, as she usually was at this hour, her hands tucked deep into flour as she worked dough into a trembling ball for tomorrow's breakfast rolls. The silence after the wind died down was almost too still, like the house itself had taken a breath it couldn't quite release. Something nudged her senses. Not a sound. Not exactly. Just a feeling. She turned. The bottom shelf of the pantry, half obscured by jars of pickled beets and dust-covered tins, was cracked open. Behind it, where sacks of rice once sat forgotten, was something square and leather-bound, the edges curled and spine nearly disintegrating. A photo album. Her fingers brushed the cover as if it might vanish. She shouldn't open it. It didn't belong to her. But she did. The leather creaked as she peeled it back. Inside, fading photographs, most black and white, others muted in color sun, washed family picnics on the lawn, top-hatted men shaking hands, children in wool coats beneath the old birch trees that lined the gravel drive. Then she found it. Tucked between pages, nearly hidden behind a pressed violet, was a photograph that made her heart seize. It showed a young woman, no older than 25, seated on the same stone bench Ivy passed every morning near the East Wing's shuttered garden. The woman's smile was quiet but real. She cradled a small child, curly-haired, perhaps 2 or 3, on her lap. The child's eyes were closed in a giggle. The woman's gaze, though, was not on the camera. It was off to the side, towards something just out of frame. Ivy turned the photo over. In old ink, someone had scrawled, "Elena and Grace, Ravenhill, the 6th of October. No year, just a name. 2, actually." She stood frozen. There was no Elena in any of the household records. She'd skimmed the staff logs when she was first hired. No Grace, either not among the children listed under Vale's family tree. Arthur Vale had new wife, new children, new heirs. A gust of wind rattled the window pane behind her. Bramble. He was suddenly there, silent, a shadow framed by the pantry doorway. His ears were up, his stance alert but not at her. His eyes fixed on something behind her. On the photo, or perhaps on the past it carried. He let out the faintest whine, almost mournful. Ivy dropped the album. The thud echoed louder than expected, muffled only by the rising patter of rain. "What are you trying to show me?" she almost whispered. But she didn't need to ask. Bramble stepped forward and nudged the photograph with his nose, gently, as if urging her to look again. She picked it back up. The woman Elena was familiar now. Not in any face Ivy had met in person, but in presence. She looked like someone who had once belonged to this house. Not a guest, not hired help. Something deeper. Someone who had once brought laughter into these walls. The child Grace could have been Vale's, the high cheekbones, that same sharp chin. But if so, why had they disappeared? Why had the East Wing been locked for 6 years? And who had told the staff never to speak of it? She carried the album close to her chest as she made her way back through the long corridor. The hallway stretched on forever at night, lined with oil portraits and cold eyes that followed you like regrets. The sconces flickered as thunder rolled low across the hills. Halfway to her quarters, she passed Mr. Whitlock. The butler's sharp gaze caught the album instantly. "Where did you find that?" "Behind the pantry," she said, too softly. "Burn it," he muttered, jaw tightening, "and forget it." "But no," he said, not harshly, but with the sort of finality that left no air in the room. "That part of this house is meant to stay buried." And with that, he turned, coat hem brushing the tile, steps echoing into the dark. She stood there for a long while. Then she looked down. Bramble was still at her side, watching her, waiting. "I can't burn it," she said aloud. "Some things aren't meant to be forgotten." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the small fire in her room, the album on her lap, and stared at the photograph of the woman with sorrow in her eye sand, a child who never made it into the records. Meanwhile, down the East Wing corridor, behind that locked wooden door, something shifted. Bramble, now asleep at Ivy's feet, suddenly twitched ears up, breath shallow. He let out one sharp bark, and somewhere inside the house, as the thunder cracked once more, a sob echoed faintly, and then silence. The afternoon sun melted softly through the tall windows of the Ravenhill estate, casting long slants of light across the marble floors of the kitchen. Miss Harrow stood by the counter, her weathered hands peeling potatoes with the patience of someone who had learned, long ago, that silence could be more powerful than words. Ivy sat nearby, her eyes flickering occasionally toward the door that led to the East Wing still closed, still locked, still watching them like an old secret waiting to be spoken. Bramble lay by the threshold, his head resting between his paws. But his ears were high, alert, twitching ever so slightly each time the floorboards groaned above. "You ever heard anything strange from over there?" Ivy asked, her voice low, as though afraid the walls might listen. Miss Harrow didn't answer immediately. She placed the peeled potato into a bowl, wiped her hands on her apron, and gave Ivy a look that was more tired than suspicious. Then, almost like she was remembering for herself more than speaking to someone else, she said, "The East Wing's been closed since before you came. Since before most of the current staff even knew this place existed." "Why?" Ivy asked. There was a long pause. "Because Arthur Vale doesn't forget pain," she finally said, looking out the window. "He preserves it like one preserves wine or a corpse, seals it behind doors, covers it in dust." Ivy blinked, unsure whether to ask more. But Bramble stirred then, lifting his head. He gave a soft, nasal whine so quiet it could have been mistaken for a breath, had it not been so intentional. Miss Harrow's eyes drifted to him. "He knows something," she murmured. "You mean Bramble?" Miss Harrow nodded. "They say dogs remember smells longer than people remember names, that they can trace sorrow on the air like a trail through the woods." Ivy hesitated, then reached into the fold of her apron and pulled out the photograph worn now at the corners, as though time itself had tried to forget it. She slid it across the counter. "Do you know who she is?" she asked. Miss Harrow's eyes fell on the picture. Her hand stopped moving. There, caught in faded sepia tones, was a young woman in a linen dress holding a child with hair the color of wet chestnuts. The child looked just shy of 3. The woman's expression was tender, but there was something behind it, too, something haunted, or maybe resigned. The background was unmistakably the same estate. Miss Harrow's voice thinned to a whisper. "Leona." Ivy's heart skipped. "She worked here? A long time ago. Maybe 7 years, give or take. She was a maid, quiet, kind, came from the lower valleys, loved books, used to read in the rose garden when she thought no one was watching." Miss Harrow reached out and gently touched the photograph, as if it were made of fragile ash. "She got pregnant." No one asked who the father was, but everyone assumed. Assumed what? That it was Mr. Vale. There it was. The words landed like frost. Ivy tried to form a response, but found herself only staring harder at the photo. The woman's eyes dark, careful looked as though they held back oceans. "What happened to her?" Ivy finally asked. Miss Harrow's shoulders hunched defensively. "She was dismissed. Overnight. No goodbyes. The next day, her room was cleaned out, her name scratched from the ledger, as if she'd never been." "Did she keep the baby?" Miss Harrow nodded slowly. "I saw her one last time, walking down the tree-lined road with nothing but a suitcase and the child in her arms. Didn't look back." Bramble let out a sharp bark, then quick and abrupt, not loud, but jarring in its timing. Both women turned. He stood now, tail low but straight, nose pointed toward the east wing. Another soft growl rumbled in his throat, low and restrained, like a memory surfacing from deep beneath fur and bone. "He does this every dusk now," Ivy said. "Same door, same hour. Like he knows something starts then." Miss Harrow moved toward Bramble slowly, kneeling beside him. Her old knees cracked, but she didn't seem to mind. She placed a wrinkled hand on his thick shoulder, and for a moment, Bramble looked straight at her, no, just in passing, but deep and focused, as though trying to say what he could not speak. "Some things in this house don't stay buried," she whispered, "no matter how deep you lock them." The room fell into a silence thick enough to feel. Outside, the wind rustled the ivy against the window panes. From the east wing, a board groaned not loud, but just enough to make the air turn still. Ivy and Miss Harrow both turned toward it. "Do you think he's warning us?" Ivy asked. Miss Harrow stood, her joints stiff, eyes sharper than they had been just moments ago. "No," she said, voice firm but quiet. "I think he's remembering. And memory, child, that's the most dangerous thing in a house like this." Just then, the kitchen clock chimed the hour, 6 sharp notes. The light had shifted dimmer now, pooling into corners, trailing away from the east wing door. Bramble didn't move. He stood sentinel, unblinking, as though waiting for something, or someone. And though Ivy didn't know why, the hair along her arms stood up. It was near midnight when the sound stirred Ivy from her sleep. She sat up in her narrow cot, heart tapping softly against her ribs. The silence of Ravenhill was usually deep, so deep, it seemed, to press against the windows, a velvet hush that wrapped around the stone bones of the manor. But tonight, it was broken. At first, she thought it was the wind, the way it sometimes curled through the tall grass beyond the east garden, sighing like an old memory. But then she heard it again, a muffled cry, small, fragile, like the sound a child makes when they're trying not to be heard, yet desperate to be found. She clutched the blanket a little tighter, her knuckles pale. The dormitory hall was still, shadows hanging like veils. Somewhere down the corridor, a floorboard creaked not loud, just the faintest protest of old timber shifting in the cold. Ivy slipped her feet into her shoes and reached for her shawl, hesitating only long enough to glance at the clock on the wall. 12:17 a.m. The cry came again. This time, it was followed by a slow, rhythmic thump as though something was gently knocking against wood. A chill pressed at the nape of her neck. She stepped out of the room. The corridors of Ravenhill at night felt older, more brittle. Paintings seemed to watch from their frames. Tapestries rustled without breeze. Ivy padded down the back staircase, her lantern throwing halos of gold onto the walls. She didn't need to guess where the sound was coming from. Her feet already knew the way. She rounded the corner to the east wing. There, in the long hallway where no staff dared linger after dusk, Bramble was already waiting. He stood in front of the sealed wooden door, motionless but alert. His ears pricked, his tail low. The fur along his shoulders bristled in silence. His eyes, the color of storm-washed ash, were fixed on the door like a soldier awaiting a signal. Then the sound came again. A muffled sob, barely a breath, and then tap, tap, tap soft knuckles against old wood. Ivy stopped just behind the dog. Her fingers gripped the handle of her lantern, knuckles tight with unspoken fear. "Bramble?" she whispered. The German shepherd didn't look at her. He gave a low, guttural growl, almost a warning, but not toward her, toward what lay beyond the door. She took a step forward, and then another, until she stood beside him. Her free hand reached out, gently grazing the doorframe. It was colder than the rest of the house, as if this part of Ravenhill hadn't felt fire or sun in years. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and something else, a sweetness that had soured, like dried flowers long forgotten in a sealed room. "Miss Ivy?" The voice behind her nearly made her drop the lantern. Whitlock had arrived, his robe belted tight, silver hair tousled. His face was pale in the low light, eyes narrowed in concern. He looked from her to Bramble, then to the door. "You heard it too," Ivy said, barely more than a breath. Whitlock nodded once. "Third time this week," he murmured. "Always around the same hour." "Is it real?" she asked. It sounded like a child. Whitlock stepped forward, studying the door. He reached out and pressed his palm flat against the center panel. There were no sounds now, no cries, no tapping. Just the silence again, thick and waiting. He turned toward Bramble. The dog hadn't moved. "I don't know what's on the other side of this door, Ivy," Whitlock said quietly. "But I no longer believe it's just memory." They stood there for a moment. 3 figures bathed in flickering light, an aging butler, a quiet maid, and a war-torn dog. Around them, Ravenhill seemed to breathe in silence. Whitlock crouched slowly, his knees aching, and ran a hand along the bottom of the door. His fingers brushed something rough. He lifted them wood splinters, jagged and sharp, claw marks, fresh. "I checked this yesterday," he murmured. "They weren't here." Bramble let out a soft whine, a sound that didn't come from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition, pain, maybe even guilt. Whitlock rose and looked at Ivy. "Let's get away from here for now. No good comes from standing in front of a locked door at this hour." "But the crying," he looked at her steady. "We'll find out, but not tonight." Reluctantly, she nodded. Bramble lingered, ears still trained on the door, until Whitlock gave a soft whistle. The dog turned, slow, as though pulling himself away from something ancient and heavy. Back in the servants' quarters, Ivy sat awake long after the candles had burned low. She traced the sound in her mind, replayed the way Bramble had stood so still, so sure. She thought of the photo she'd tucked under her pillow, the woman in it, the child, and how, in the silence of the East Wing, someone still seemed to remember. The rain had finally stopped. Outside the manor, the sky hung heavy with silence, clouds bruised and swollen but no longer weeping. Inside, the corridors of Wycliffe Estate held their breath. Shadows clung to the corners, not out of fear but out of memory. Whitlock walked with his usual precision through the main corridor, the polished tips of his shoes muffled by the thick Persian runner. He carried a silver tray with only a glass of untouched brandy on it, an old habit from years of serving a master who had not touched drink since the funeral. His eyes, however, were somewhere else, fixed on the East Wing hallway, where the chill in the air refused to leave, no matter how many fires they lit in the hearth, and where Bramble now sat, The German Shepherd was still, unnaturally still, ears pricked forward, eyes trained on the wooden door like it might suddenly breathe. Whitlock paused at a distance. "Again?" he murmured. Bramble didn't respond. He merely stood, padded closer to the door, and began to scratch, not furiously, but deliberately, like peeling away a scab. Wood flaked beneath his nails. The soft sound echoed like a whisper down the hall. Whitlock set the tray aside on a table and stepped forward. He had long stopped reprimanding the dog. Something about Bramble's behavior, ever since the incident in July, had made the old butler hesitate. It wasn't madness. It was memory. He crouched low, the faint ache of age pressing into his knees, and ran a hand across the base of the door. Dust. That in itself wasn't surprising. The east wing hadn't been entered in years. But something made his fingers pause. There was a break in the dust knot, the kind made by drafts or mice. A trail. Thin, deliberate. A quiet path where dust had been disturbed, leading from under the door and vanishing into the hallway behind him. Whitlock stared at it. Faint, barely there, but real. Bramble growled low. The sound snapped Whitlock's gaze back. The dog's ears tilted slightly, and his body leaned forward, nose hovering just above the gap under the door. Whitlock followed the dog's line of sight and froze. There was something different tonight. It took him a moment to register it, because it wasn't light in the ordinary sense. Not candlelight, not moonlight, but a faint glow pale, flickering, like the shimmer of a dying flame, and it was seeping from the base of the door. Only visible from down low. Only visible if you were on Bramble's level. He knelt slowly, heart knocking once, twice, inside his chest. There it was, again a flicker, like a pulse, then darkness, then light, once more. He reached out not to open the door, but just to feel it. The wood was cold, damp at the bottom, like something on the other side had been weeping. He stood. "Miss Ivy?" he called, not loudly, but enough to travel through the echoing corridor. A moment later, footsteps approached from the far hallway. Ivy rounded the corner, still in her gray house shoes, hair pulled back into a loose, sensible bun. "Yes, Mr. Whitlock?" she asked. Her voice always sounded like she didn't want to disturb the walls. He gestured toward the base of the door. "Do you see it?" She followed his line of sight, crouching as he had. The moment her eyes found the light, she gasped, but softly. Not out of fear, out of recognition. "That wasn't there before," she whispered. "Not even last night." Whitlock's hands folded behind his back, and he exhaled slowly. "Nor was the trail of dust. Something or someone has been walking through here, but not from our side." Ivy glanced at Bramble, who still stood like a soldier at attention. His body trembled slightly, not in fear, but in restraint. "Do you think it's—" She paused, struggling for words. "Is someone inside?" Whitlock's face tightened. "No one should be inside. That wing was sealed before you or I were ever hired. Miss Harrow doesn't speak of it, and Mr. Alden never mentioned it. But the dog knows something." Ivy lowered her voice even further. "Do you think it's the woman in the photograph?" Whitlock didn't answer. Bramble gave a soft whimper, backing up now, tail lowered, eyes never leaving the door. The light beneath had faded, but the sense of presence remained thick in the air, like smoke after a fire. Whitlock turned to Ivy. "No matter what you hear at night," he said quietly, "do not open any doors in this wing. Do not wander, and do not let Bramble out of your sight." She nodded, though her hands had started to tremble slightly. He placed a firm, gentle hand on her shoulder. "This house has seen grief, Miss Ivy, and grief, when left unanswered, finds its own voice." "Yeah." They stood together for a while in the silence, the kind that pressed into the ribs and left thoughts unfinished. Then, as if sensing the conversation had run too long, Bramble barked unsharp, low, and guttural. It wasn't a warning. It was a calling. The sound rippled through the corridor, bouncing off the framed paintings and settling into the wallpaper like an echo that knew where it belonged. And in the stillness that followed, they both felt it. A breath. From the other side of the door, the morning broke with a coldness that lingered beyond the weather. Fog crept low over the estate, curling between the hedgerows and swallowing the gravel paths in silence. The manor's great windows were streaked with condensation, blurring the world beyond like a fading memory. Mr. Whitlock stood near the east wing corridor, his back rigid, hands folded behind him. Ivy lingered beside him, eyes lowered but attentive. Bramble sat at Whitlock's heel, tail still, ears perked toward the locked wooden door. He had taken to sitting there every morning now, without command or coaxing, as if waiting for something, or someone. The quiet was broken by the heavy thud of polished boots. Arthur Vale stormed down the hallway with a sharpness that seemed to cut the very air. Whitlock. The name was a blade. Whitlock turned, his expression unreadable. Arthur's eyes flicked to Bramble, then to Ivy, then to the east wing door. "I've had enough of this nonsense." The butler inclined his head slightly. "Sir?" The whispering, the lurking, the maid with the haunted eyes, the dog growling at shadows like some demented priest. His tone was low, controlled, but there was a tremor beneath it. He restrained fury. "Forgive me, sir," Whitlock replied calmly, "but there have been disturbances." Disturbances?" Arthur snapped, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "We are not in a ghost story, Mr. Whitlock. We are in my house, and I will not have my staff behaving like children frightened of their own imagination." Ivy flinched, eyes darting to the floor. Arthur stepped closer to Bramble, who rose instinctively. The dog's hackles lifted not in aggression, but in that subtle, primal way of sensing danger not yet formed. "Chain that mutt outside," Arthur ordered. "Now, Whitlock's jaw tensed. "Bramble is highly trained, sir. He is disruptive, and I've had enough. I'm giving you a direct order." Arthur leaned in, voice colder. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer your severance?" A long pause settled between them like fog made of silence. Whitlock's gaze did not flinch. "As you wish, sir," he said finally, and bent to clip the leash to Bramble's collar. Bramble resisted not violently, not with teeth or bark, but with a kind of stillness that was more heartbreaking. He looked up at Whitlock with the kind of trust that never needed words. A flick of the ear, a low whine. Ivy turned away, swallowing hard. Outside, the fog had thickened, turning the estate's garden into a ghost of itself. Whitlock led Bramble down the stone steps, past the old hydrangeas whose heads drooped with the weight of dew, past the sundial that no longer cast a shadow, to the iron ring beneath the gnarled oak tree where, years ago, hunting hounds were once kept. The chain clicked into place with an almost cruel finality. Bramble didn't bark. He didn't pull or snap. He simply sat, watching the manor, watching the east wing. Inside, Arthur stood alone at the tall window in his study, a glass of something amber in his hand, though the day had barely begun. He stared toward the oak tree, at the dark silhouette of the chained dog. Then the howl came, low at first, a sound that curled like smoke from the earth. Then resounded a long, sorrowful lament that climbed past the rafters and through the chimney flues, a sound that did not belong to hunger or anger or pain. It was grief. Arthur froze. The glass in his hand trembled slightly. The howl came again, longer this time, breaking mid-note into something almost human. In the kitchen, Miss Harrow dropped a spoon. Ivy, in the linen room, pressed her hands to her ears. Even the birds beyond the orchard seemed to pause their morning calls. Whitlock, back at the front corridor, closed his eyes. His hands were still, but the faint tremor in his knuckles betrayed him. Outside, Bramble stared at the house with those knowing eyes, the kind that had seen war zones and whispered truths, the kind that did not forget. He didn't bark again. He simply laid down on the cold earth, nose between his paws, and stared. Arthur drained his glass in one swallow and turned from the window sharply. "Not another word about that wing," he hissed to no one and everyone, "or I'll have the lot of you replaced." But as he walked away, something lingered in his face. Not guilt, not remorse, fear. The sky had turned the color of bruised, fruit-muted violets, fading into deeper blue when the first clang of chain against stone echoed through the courtyard. Ivy had just finished folding linens in the laundry when she heard it. A sharp metallic rattle followed by a low, throaty growl that didn't sound angry, just desperate. She rushed to the window, lifting the sheer curtain with trembling fingers. In the twilight, she could just make out the dark blur of Bramble's chain still dangling from his collar, bounding toward the east wing like a phantom slipping through the veil of night. How he got free, she didn't know. The chain Arthur Vale had used was meant for livestock, thick and cold and cruel. She'd seen the way it dug into Bramble's fur, heard the way he whimpered when no one else was around. But now he was moving with purpose, each stride like a memory returning to him. Ivy didn't hesitate. She slipped out through the scullery door, her footsteps barely making a sound on the wet cobblestones. The air was damp, saturated with the scent of loam and old stone. Somewhere, an owl called, soft and hollow. But she followed only Bramble. He disappeared behind the crumbling hedge that lined the back garden, what used to be the servant's path, long since overgrown. By the time she caught up, her breath was uneven, the hem of her dress damp with dew. She found him beside the old stone entrance of the east winged door, long sealed from the inside, its hinges rusted shut, Ivy clutching the frame like fingers unwilling to let go. And Bramble was digging. His paws worked in frantic rhythm, soil flying, claws scraping against what sounded like wood. His breath came in huffs, short and sharp. Not from exhaustion, but urgency. Ivy stepped closer and knelt beside him. "Bramble," she whispered. "What are you doing, boy?" He didn't look at her. His focus was absolute. When she touched his shoulder, his body was trembling not from fear, but something more primal, a kind of memory that didn't need words. That's when she saw it. Just beneath the churned earth, something dark. Wood, maybe. A slat. Narrow and rotten at the edges. She brushed the dirt away with her fingers, and it gave under the pressure soft, damp, but intact. A hatch. She looked at Bramble. His ears twitched. He stopped digging and stared at her, his eyes holding hers with quiet insistence. This wasn't just instinct. It was knowledge. Ivy swallowed hard. Her heart thudded not with fear, but with something heavier. The kind of dread that grows not from what you see, but from what you almost remember. She reached down and pulled at the wood. It cracked, splintered slightly, but lifted. Beneath it, darkness, and a smell-mildewed damp stone and something else. Something that didn't belong. Sweet, almost metallic. Bramble backed up and whined low in his throat. Ivy stood, her fingers muddy, her thoughts racing. She turned toward the house, toward the faint outline of the back kitchen door, and saw a flicker of movement in the window. Someone watching. She stepped away from the hatch, pulling the wood back over the opening. Bramble gave a low growl but didn't resist. "I know," she whispered, "but not now. Not yet." That night, as the wind howled over the moors and the house groaned in its bones, Ivy sat alone in her room, the curtains drawn tight. Bramble had been confined again, but this time she knew he would not stay. She could still feel the texture of the wood against her palm. Old, cold, undisturbed for years. But something below had changed, and Bramble, he had remembered something no one else dared to. The storm had passed, but its silence lingered. That strange, hollow stillness after the rain when everything feels like it's listening. Whitlock held the lantern low, its flickering light painting long shadows across the damp stone walls of the wine cellar. Bottles lined the shelves like forgotten soldiers, their labels faded, some gone altogether. The air was sharp with the scent of old cork and mold, the floor cold beneath Ivy's shoes. She followed a step behind him, her arms wrapped around herself, not from cold, but from the echo of something Bramble had uncovered the night before. She hadn't told Whitlock about the hatch. Not yet. Some part of her instinct maybe had whispered to wait. But now, Whitlock had called her down, voice low, almost unsure. "I found something." The farthest shelf against the back wall stood slightly askew, as though the house itself had exhaled and shifted it. Ivy watched as Whitlock pushed his shoulder into it gently. There was resistance, then a muted creak. The shelf groaned, then moved, revealing a narrow opening just wide enough for one person to slip through. Behind it, stone steps, winding downward into the dark-like vertebrae into a buried spine. She blinked. That wasn't in the blueprints. Whitlock gave a dry smile. "Nothing in this house ever is." He stepped aside, holding the lantern toward the gap. "Shall we?" She hesitated, then ducked through. The space narrowed quickly, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. The steps beneath her feet crumbled slightly with each touch, stone edges worn smooth in places, jagged in others. It wasn't built for comfort, just function. Secret, forgotten function. Whitlock came behind, his free hand brushing the wall for balance. Their footsteps echoed, a slow rhythm of caution. After what felt like 20 steps, the stairwell curved and opened into a short corridor, barely shoulder wide. The walls here were damp, marked with streaks of dark green moss, and the ceiling dipped so low Ivy had to crouch. Then she saw it. A door. Not ornate, just heavy. Wood swollen with time, iron hinges pitted with rust, a thick bar bolted across it, half broken. The lantern's light caught the surface, and Ivy froze. Scratches. Long, uneven, desperate scratches, not made by tools, not from the outside, from within. She moved closer, heart drumming low and steady. Whitlock knelt beside her. "Claw marks," he said, voice quieter than the wind. "And old." Ivy said nothing. She reached out, almost without thinking, and touched the wood. It was damp, the grain rising like veins beneath her fingers. There was something awful about those marks, not just the violence, but the rhythm, the way they overlapped. Someone, something, had tried for hours, days maybe, to get out. Whitlock looked at her. "We should bring a crowbar." She nodded slowly. "Tomorrow morning." But even as she said it, a quiet voice within her whispered, "Number tonight." Before someone else does. The lantern's light danced on the stone walls as Ivy descended first, careful not to disturb the brittle edge of the steps. Whitlock followed in silence. The crowbar slung across his shoulder. Behind them, Bramble patted down with uncharacteristic stillness, ears alert, shoulders tense, every breath measured. The door waited where they had left it ancient, bowed inward slightly, like something behind it had once pressed hard against its weight. But tonight, the air felt different, thicker. "Still?" Ivy didn't speak. She crouched beside the door and touched the wood again, fingers resting near the faded scratches. She tilted her head, her ear brushing lightly against the grain, and froze. It was faint, so faint, she thought at first. It was only the hum of her own pulse. But then it came again, steady, soft, a voice, a child's, humming. Not words, just a melody, simple and slow. The kind a child might sing to a doll. A lullaby, maybe. Off-key. Repeating. Whitlock stiffened as Ivy reached for his hand, guiding him silently toward the door. He lowered his head, placing his ear gently against the wood. A long breath. Then another. He heard it too. Ivy whispered, "It's coming from behind the door." The air felt colder now. Bramble, who had sat quietly behind them until now, moved forward. He didn't growl, didn't bark, just sat rigid, poised, his eyes locked on the door, his ears back. His breath quickened, chest rising and falling in short bursts. But he made no sound. Ivy turned slowly to look at him. She had never seen Bramble like this. Alert, yes. Protective, yes. But this was different. He wasn't afraid. He was listening. The humming continued, soft as mist, as if drifting through water. Not angry, not urgent, just there. And something in it didn't belong. It wasn't just the melody. It was the loneliness inside it. Whitlock stepped back. "No one's lived down here for decades, maybe more." "Then who's singing?" He didn't answer. They sat in the stillness for a long while. The old lantern flickered. The stone walls seemed to draw in closer. Ivy finally spoke, barely a whisper. "I think someone never left." Bramble let out a breath knot, a growl, not a whine, just one exhale, sharp and fast. Then stillness again. The humming faded, not stopped, just receded, as though whoever had been singing knew they were being heard. Whitlock stepped away. "We'll come back tomorrow." But Ivy didn't move. Her gaze stayed on Bramble. "He's not barking," she said softly. "That's not like him." Whitlock looked back. "He knows something." Ivy knelt beside Bramble, resting a hand on his neck. His fur was damp with sweat, his eyes wide but dry, still locked on the door, still listening. "I don't think it's danger," she said. "I think it's memory." Whitlock tilted his head. "You think he's been here before?" Her voice trembled slightly. But I think something down here remembers him. Bramble slowly lowered his head, eyes still forward. Then he lay down, ears twitching, but silent, and the humming returned. Not louder, but closer. The hinges screamed when the crowbar wedged beneath the rusted latch gave way. It wasn't force that finally opened the door. It was patience. Whitlock had worked in silence, steady hands and set jaw, while Ivy kept her ear to the cold wood, listening. The humming had stopped. Now there was only Breath Bramble's low, anxious panting behind them, and the tight inhale of Ivy as the door creaked inward on long-forgotten hinges. A stale gust pushed into their faces. Not foul, not rank just old, dust and time. Paper, rust, forgotten cloth. The lantern's light stretched into the dark room beyond. It was small, 8 feet by maybe 10. Stone walls, low ceiling, shelves sagging under damp books and jars of things, long turned to powder. An iron bed frame without a mattress, a small wooden horse, its wheels missing, lying on its side like it had fallen decades ago and no one had come to pick it up. And in the far corner, crouched so still that for a moment she seemed like part of the room itself. A child. She was curled in on herself, her knees drawn tight to her chest, arms wrapped around them. She wore a thin, pale dress that hung off her shoulders, like it belonged to another season. Her hair clung to her cheeks in wisps, the color of moonlight stained with dust. She didn't move, didn't cry out, only lifted a hands low, trembling against the soft glow of the lantern as if to shield herself from a sun she hadn't seen in years. Ivy took a step forward, then stopped, heart caught in her throat. The girl blinked. She was maybe 6, maybe younger. Her eyes were too large for her face, too quiet, not wild but worn, eyes that had known waiting, eyes that had forgotten what came after. Whitlock set the crowbar down slowly, the sound soft against the stone. His voice was a whisper, hoarse from emotion. "It's okay, sweetheart." No response, just a breath, then another. Bramble didn't bark, didn't growl. He walked forward slowly, stopping just behind Ivy, his head low, tail still. His body language wasn't that of a protector anymore, but of a listener, a seeker. Like whatever had called them here, had called him too. The girl flinched as the light neared. Ivy knelt, setting the lantern on the floor. "Hi," she said, voice barely louder than breath. "My name is Ivy. This is Whitlock. And the doggie's name's Bramble. He's a good boy. You don't have to be afraid." The girl didn't answer, but her eyes darted to the dog. And for the first time, a flicker passed through them. Recognition? Number. Something deeper. Relief. Like something in her had loosened. Ivy saw it. Saw the tiny shift in her shoulders. Saw the way her fingers uncurled ever so slightly. Whitlock stepped to the side, moving slowly around the room's edge, eyes taking in every detail. "How long?" he murmured. But the question hung useless in the air. There was no answer to it. Not yet. Ivy reached out, not to touch, just to offer. Her hand hovered there, palm up, open. The girl stared at it. Then, after what felt like a lifetime of breathless silence, she whispered, "Is it morning?" The words came cracked, brittle as dried leaves. Ivy's throat caught. "Yes," she lied gently. "Yes, it's morning now." The girl didn't smile, but she nodded just once. A slow, mechanical motion like her bones had to remember how. And then she reached out. Her hand touched Ivy's. It was cold, so small, but it was real, and it was enough. Whitlock exhaled the breath he'd been holding. Bramble sat down, and in that quiet room beneath the earth, after days of silence, the whisper of truth finally found its voice in words, but in the simple miracle of a child's hand reaching for another. The first thing Ivy noticed were the girl's eyes gray like the morning before snow. They blinked against the light, unsure, then settled on Ivy's face with an aching kind of hunger. It wasn't fear. It was hope, fragile and trembling, like a thread strung too tight for too long. The girl so small, she looked like she'd been forgotten by time, remained curled in the far corner of the narrow basement room, her back against cold stone, her knees drawn tight to her chest. Dust clung to her nightgown like a second skin. Her hair, tangled and dull, had the color of dried wheat. Ivy took a cautious step forward, but Bramble was already there. The shepherd lay low to the ground, his breathing soft, rhythmic as eyes, never left the child. She didn't flinch when he nudged her with his nose. Instead, she reached out a tiny hand and placed it gently on his muzzle. "You came back," the girl whispered. Ivy knelt. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" The girl hesitated. Her voice was almost inaudible. "Lily." Ivy felt the name settle in her chest like a stone skipping across a still lake. Bramble turned his head toward Ivy, as if confirming something he had known long before they opened the door. Lily studied Ivy, her head tilting slowly, eyes tracing every line of her facial cheekbones, the curve of her lips, the glint of a tear forming at the corner of her eye. "Are you my mom?" she asked softly. The question struck with the gentleness of falling snow, and yet it broke something in Ivy. Her throat tightened. Whitlock, who had been hovering near the doorway, took a half-step back, giving them space. Ivy managed. "I'm not, but I'm here now." Lily blinked slowly. "You look like her. A little." Ivy swallowed hard. "Can you tell me about her? Your mom?" The girl nodded. Her fingers curled into Bramble's fur. She didn't look directly at Ivy anymore. Her voice drifted, like a memory carried on wind. "She used to sing," Lily said. "At night, when the house was quiet. She said the lullaby would keep the bad dreams away." Ivy glanced at Whitlock. He didn't speak, but his jaw was tight. "She had long hair," Lily added. "It smelled like flowers. Not the real kind, though. The ones in soap." There was silence, except for the hum of an old pipe groaning somewhere above. "She kissed me right here." Lily tapped the center of her forehead every night, before she left. Ivy knelt closer, her hands trembling. "Do you remember when she left?" The girl's face dimmed. "She said she'd be right back, that the man in the hall needed to talk, but she didn't come back. I waited so long." A tear slid down Ivy's cheek. Lily reached out, and with the same stillness that seemed to define her, brushed it away with the back of her hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "You didn't leave me. You came." Ivy pulled her into a soft embrace. The girl didn't resist. She melted into her arms like someone who had forgotten what warmth felt like. Bramble rested his head on Ivy's knee and let out a breath, deep and low. "Who kept you down here?" Whitlock finally asked, his voice quiet but edged with something dark. Lily tensed slightly, but didn't pull away. "The lady," she said after a moment. "She wore gray, like the walls." "The housekeeper?" Ivy asked. Lily nodded. "She said it was safer down here, safer than upstairs." Ivy's mind raced. She remembered the woman's coldness, her precision. Her gaze never lingered on children's things, never on Bramble. "Did anyone else come?" Ivy asked. Lily looked at her hands. "Sometimes the man. He never talked to me. He just looked, like I was part of the wall." A long silence followed. Whitlock stepped closer. "Lily," he said gently, "do you know how long you've been here?" The girl blinked. "Is it still summer?" It was November. Ivy looked around the basement, room no windows. No clock, no calendar, just a mattress on the floor, a cracked porcelain doll in the corner, and drawings' faint pencil marks scattered on the stone walls. Crude flowers, a woman with long hair, a dog. "We're going to get you out of here," Ivy said, steadying her voice. "You're safe now." Lily gripped her tighter. "Promise?" "I promise," Ivy whispered. Whitlock radioed for help. His voice, while calm, betrayed urgency in its clipped words. As they waited, Ivy rocked Lily gently, brushing strands of hair from her forehead. There was something unspoken between them, something not defined by biology or blood. It was the kind of bond born in the quiet after chaos, in the space where love was more action than word. "She likes that song," Lily murmured. "What song?" "The one with the stars. The one you hum." Ivy blinked. She hadn't realized she had been humming under her breath. It was the same lullaby her mother used to sing to her. "Did your mom sing that one too?" Ivy asked. Lily nodded slowly. "She said it came from her mom. Maybe it came from yours too." Oh, in that moment, something shifted. Ivy wasn't just a stranger in a cold house anymore. She was the echo of a promise someone else had made. A continuation. The door at the top of the stairs opened. Voices. Footsteps. Ivy. Whitlock called gently. They're here. But neither Ivy nor Lily moved. Bramble stood first. He didn't bark. He simply walked to the foot of the stairs, then turned and waited, as if to say, this part is over now. What comes next is yours. The old hinges didn't dare creak as Whitlock closed the basement door behind them. But it wasn't just fear of noise that made his hand tremble. It was the weight of what they'd just seen, what they now carried. Ivy held Lily close to her chest as they moved through the narrow servants' corridor, dust clinging to their sleeves like shadows that refused to let go. Bramble led the way, padding silently up the stone steps, ears pivoting at every sound. Though he'd often seemed restless before, tonight he moved with focus, guarding every corner as though he understood the gravity of their mission. And maybe, in his way, he did. Animals like him didn't need language to know when the world had bent into something broken. I don't want to go back down, Lily whispered, voice dry as old paper. She clutched Ivy's coat with small shaking fingers. You won't, Ivy murmured. I promise. M. They emerged into the stillness of the east hallway, where the portraits watched from behind glassy eyes. Bramble paused, head tilted toward the main staircase, but when no footsteps echoed, he moved again, tail stiff. At the top floor, Miss Harrow stood waiting by the attic ladder, her arms crossed over her apron. Her face, usually stern and unreadable, had softened. You found her! Her voice cracked. Whitlock nodded. She's real. The housekeeper looked at the girl pail, barefoot, eyes too large for her small frame, and something inside her broke, silently but visibly. Quickly now, she said. Upstairs. I'll draw the curtains in the parlor. Veils due back from the mainland by dawn. Ivy carried Lily up the narrow attic ladder, every creak of the wood threatening to betray them. Above, the laundry attic was nothing more than a room of eaves and angles, heavy with dust and slanted light. The old drying racks still hung from the ceiling like skeletons of forgotten chores. A patchwork of blankets and an old mattress were laid in a corner, as if the house had known, somehow, that a child might one day return to it. Miss Harrow climbed up behind them and knelt beside Lily. We'll keep her safe here, she said softly, smoothing back the child's hair. The vents lead to the west wing. If she whispers, no one will hear. Lily's eyes darted toward the slatted vent, then back to Ivy. Do you know lullabies? I used to, Ivy answered. Would you like me to sing one? The girl nodded once, slow, as though permission was something new to her. But Ivy didn't sing. Not yet. Her throat was tight with questions, with fury, with wonder. Instead, she sat beside the mattress and took Lily's hand, pressing it between her own like a seal. Whitlock stood at the threshold of the attic, his silhouette outlined by the faint spill of gaslight from the hallway below. He looked older somehow, the lines near his eyes deeper, his shoulders heavy. How long do you think she was down there? Long enough for the world to forget her, Ivy replied, not looking up. But Bramble didn't. The dog had curled beside Lily now, head resting on his paws. His breath was steady but alert. He would not leave her, not again. Whitlock stepped inside, lowering himself to the dusty floor. We need to be careful. Vale isn't just rich. He's connected. He could bury this if we move wrong. Ivy looked at him sharply. Then we don't move wrong. There was a pause. Wind outside whispered against the old slate roof. The house seemed to exhale. Miss Harrow stood, dusted off her apron, and walked to the attic door. I'll bring food at nightfall. Nothing too warm it can't smell. And I'll say the raccoons are back if anyone asks about the noise. You'd risk that? Whitlock asked. The old woman turned, eyes flaring for the first time in years. She's a child, in my house, and Arthur Vale is not God. Whitlock gave a slow nod. Then we're agreed. Lily stirred again. Are you my family now? The question dropped into the silence like a pebble into a deep well. Ivy bent down and kissed the girl's forehead. We are for now, she said softly. And we're going to make sure you're never alone again. Whitlock looked away, blinking fast. We'll need records, he murmured half to himself. Something to prove who she is. Birth certificate, DNA, whatever we can find. Otherwise, she's just a story no one believes. She remembers songs, Ivy said, and someone with long hair who used to sing. It might be her mother. Whitlock's eyes narrowed. We start there. Bramble shifted, lifting his head slightly as if something in the air had changed. His ears twitched toward the attic vent. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his throat. Footsteps, far below. Miss Harrow froze, then slowly backed toward the hatch. Go, she whispered. I'll stall them. I'm staying, Ivy said firmly, pulling Lily closer. Whitlock hesitated, then nodded. We'll meet again at midnight, behind the carriage house. As he disappeared down the ladder, Bramble didn't follow. He simply pressed his flank closer to Lily, as though to say, "This is where I belong now." The attic grew quiet again. Only the hum of the wind and the soft, slow breathing of the child remained. Ivy lay back on the mattress, eyes never leaving the vent. Somewhere, dust drifted in the moonlight. Somewhere, truth sat waiting in silence. And in that small, hidden room above the bones of the house, a dog kept watch over a girl who should have never been forgotten. The rain had stopped by morning, but the mist hadn't lifted. It clung to the hedgerows and stone paths like a memory refusing to fade, casting Greywick Manor in a haze of secrets too heavy to name. Ivy stood in the records room tucked behind the east study, the soft creak of aged floorboards beneath her boots the only sound. Bramble sat by the door, ears alert, tail unmoving his presence now a quiet constant, like breath in the cold. The room smelled of paper rot and stale ink, lined floor to ceiling with narrow filing cabinets, hundreds of them, brass handles dulled with time. She had no map, no clear direction, only a feeling. And Bramble's stare. Her fingers trembled as she opened drawer after drawer, metal scraping against metal like whispers in the dark. She didn't know what she was looking for until she saw it. A beige folder, nearly lost in a stack of maintenance logs. There was no reason for it to be there, except that someone had wanted it forgotten. She opened it slowly. Name of child, Lillian Mare Vale. Date of birth, the 3rd of October, 2016. Place of birth, Greywick Medical Annex. Mother, left blank. Guardian, Arthur Vale. Certifying physician, Dr. Harlan M. Cross. Her eyes hovered over the signature. A crooked scrawl. Familiar. Ivy stepped back from the cabinet, throat tight. Lillian Mare, she whispered. The name hit her like a cold slap. It wasn't just the girl's full name, it was the way Mare curled on the page, almost like Mare, like something dreamt or forgotten, like the lullaby Lily had tried to hum, broken and drifting. She flipped the record over, seeking any notation that might explain. Instead, her fingers found a sticky note pressed under the last page. Its ink was faded, scrawled in haste. Ask nothing. File quietly. He said she's not to leave. See. Ivy's hands shook. The girl hadn't been a lost child. She'd been kept. She stumbled to the desk, pulling the birth record close. She opened the drawer of the heavy ledger where other staff files were kept and flipped through until she found one labeled Medical Contractors Annex, archived. She didn't recognize most of the names until one in the middle leapt at her. Dr. Harlan Cross, Consulting Pediatrician Contract, terminated 2021. Status, missing. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. Last seen entering property. No further communication. Ivy sat down hard. 3 years ago, that would have made Lily just shy of 4. The same year the construction in the East Wing had halted. The same year Miss Harrow had first started leaving the 3rd floor locked. Her thoughts were a storm now. Bramble shifted slightly, letting out a low, almost inaudible whine, not of alarm, but of something else. Recognition. She glanced over. You knew, didn't you? She whispered. You knew someone was down there. Oh. Bramble didn't move. Only blinked once. Slow. Measured. Ivy closed the folder carefully and placed it in her satchel, then stood and locked the drawer behind her. She didn't know who else might come looking. As she stepped into the hallway, Whitlock was there. He leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, the shadows under his eyes deeper than the night before. You found something, he said, not asking. Ivy nodded and handed him the folder. He flipped through the record in silence, reading slowly. His jaw clenched at the signature, and even more so at the yellowed sticky note. I know this handwriting, he said quietly. Clemens, Vale's personal assistant, vanished 2 winters back. Nobody ever asked why. They stood there, two souls too tired to pretend it didn't matter anymore. "She's his," Ivy said. "Legally. Or at least on paper." "No mother listed," Whitlock muttered. "No trace of consent. Just a signature from a ghost doctor and a guardian title filed under a locked drawer." "He owns her, Whit," Ivy said softly, the words catching in her throat. "At least by every measure that matters to this place. But that doesn't make it real." Whitlock was quiet for a long moment, staring down the corridor as if the truth might materialize in the silence. "She thinks you're her mother," he finally said. "She clings to you like a thread she remembers." "I don't know why," Ivy murmured, "but there's something familiar about her. I feel it too, like a splinter under the skin." Whitlock closed the file and tucked it inside his coat. "We need more than paper. We need something that burns this lie to the ground." A door creaked in the distance. The manor was always groaning, always breathing behind the walls, but now it felt like it was listening. Ivy looked up. "We bring her story into the light." "No," Whitlock said gently. "Not yet. Vale has eyes everywhere. We do this quietly. We do it right." Bramble let out a single bark short, sharp. Both of them turned. And from somewhere above, faint and muffled, came the unmistakable voice of Lily. Not calling, not crying, just singing. A soft hum of a lullaby neither of them recognized, but Ivy knew. She had heard it before. In dreams, in a voice not hers, in the quiet of another life. It was a strange hour to hear knocking at one's door just past midnight, when the house had quieted into its usual hush, and even the wind outside had tired of whispering. Ivy stood at the laundry stairwell, her fingers cold from holding the crumpled birth record too tightly. The forged name still pulsed like a bruise in her hand. She climbed the attic steps slowly, Bramble padding behind her, tail low, eyes solemn. He'd taken to Lily as if she were part of him, shadowing her every breath, sleeping by the cot Miss Harrow had made from old linens and forgotten pillows. When they entered, the girl was asleep, curled in a patch of moonlight like something fragile made of dust and memory. Miss Harrow sat on a wooden chair beside the small window, knitting idle loops that unraveled in her lap. She didn't look up. "I read it," Ivy said softly, holding out the paper. "It's fake. The doctor who signed it went missing in 1961. Miss Harrow's hand stilled. The yarn fell to the floor with a soft thud. "I thought if I kept quiet long enough, it would all stay buried," she murmured, still not meeting Ivy's eyes. "But the thing about buried truths is they keep breathing, even under 6 feet of silence." Ivy pulled the chair closer, sitting beside her. She looked down at her own hands, the dirt still under her nails from that garden, from the passage Bramble led them through like a creature who remembered too much. "You were there when she was born, weren't you?" Ivy asked. "You delivered her." Miss Harrow nodded slowly, her eyes glinting in the moonlight, rimmed with something old remorse, maybe, or something heavier. "She was early," she said. 6 weeks, I think. Barely cried when she came. We thought she wouldn't last the night. Leona named her Lily. Said it was the only thing that had ever bloomed for her. At the sound of her name, the girl stirred in her sleep. A soft whimper caught in her throat. Bramble moved closer, lying beside the cot, a low hum vibrating in his chest like comfort. Ivy whispered, "What happened to Leona?" Miss Harrow swallowed hard. The truth came out not as words, but as a breath held too long. "Arthur Vale happened," she said bitterly. "He came back from his trip abroad and saw the child. Said the family name couldn't afford scandal, that no bastard child would ruin the estate's legacy." Her lips trembled. "He gave Leona an envelope, said it was a chance to start over. But it was a trap, a one-way ticket and a note, 'Disappear.' And she did. She left that night without Lily." Ivy's voice cracked. "She left her baby?" "No." Miss Harrow shook her head fiercely. "She didn't want to. I heard her crying in the nursery, whispering to Lily that she would come back, that it wouldn't be forever. But Vale sent men to the train station. I never saw her again. No one did." A long silence fell, broken only by the sound of Lily's soft breathing and the faint rustle of Bramble's tail against the wooden floor. "Why didn't you tell someone?" Ivy whispered. "The police, the press, anyone?" "Because I was a servant in his house," Miss Harrow said, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. And because I was afraid of what he could do to her, to the child, to me, I convinced myself that as long as Lily was fed and warm, I could live with the rest. She stood then, walking toward the cot. Her hand hovered above Lily's brow, as if touching her might break her. She started humming the songs Leona used to sing. That's when I knew memory was louder than silence. Ivy reached out, gently resting her hand over the older woman's. "You don't have to protect his secrets anymore." "I know," Miss Harrow said, "but I do have to protect her." The moonlight shifted slightly, casting a silver halo across Lily's sleeping form. Her small fingers twitched, as if grasping something unseen, a mother's hand, perhaps, or the echo of a lullaby once sung. "Do you think she remembers her?" Ivy asked softly. Miss Harrow nodded. "Children remember in pieces. Not in words, but in warmth, in scent, in the way a song wraps around the bones." Bramble lifted his head, watching them both. There was something knowing in his gaze, something almost human. He had followed the faintest scent, dug through frozen dirt, and led them to the child no one was supposed to find. "She's not just a secret anymore," Ivy said. "She's a person, a little girl who needs safety and truth." Miss Harrow lowered herself beside the cot, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's cheek. "Then help me do right by her," she said, "even if it's years too late." "And so," Ivy nodded, her throat tight, "we start with the doctor. If we find where he went, we may find proof. Leona's disappearance wasn't just abandonment. It was forced." "And if Vale knew you were looking?" Miss Harrow asked quietly. "I don't care," Ivy said. "I'm not afraid of ghosts anymore. Not his, not the ones in this house." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the old glass. Somewhere in the darkened garden below, a door long forgotten creaked on its hinge. And upstairs, beneath an attic roof and layers of regret, 3 lives leaned gently into the breath of a second chance. The night was unusually still. Outside the window panes, mist clung to the glass like quiet breath, blurring the world beyond into shades of ash and blue. The old house creaked as if whispering in its sleep, each groan of the wooden beams a soft echo of age and memory. Ivy stirred on the downstairs settee, the fire long since dimmed to embers. Bramble had insisted on sleeping by the attic that night. Uncharacteristically stubborn, he'd refused his usual place at her feet. She hadn't questioned it, not after everything, not after Lily. But now, a sound reached her. Not a bark, not even a whimper, just silence. A stillness so complete it carved into her chest like a blade of ice. She rose quietly, blankets still wrapped around her shoulders, and padded barefoot through the hallway. The air shifted as she neared the stairwell thicker. Somehow the kind of weight you feel just before a storm breaks. At the attic door she stopped. Bramble was there, not lying down, not asleep, just sitting, frozen, his entire body locked stiff, ears low but taut, hackles faintly raised. The pads of his paws trembled against the floorboards. His breathing was fast but contained, not panicked, not loud, like he was bracing against something deep inside. "Bramble?" Ivy knelt slowly beside him. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the seam beneath the attic door, on the space where candlelight from within flickered gently, leaking through the slats, where the faintest human child's sleepy breath rose and fell. Lily. The girl had fallen asleep hours ago, curled in the corner of the laundry attic with her little arms around a worn stuffed rabbit Miss Harrow had salvaged from an old donation box. She hadn't made a sound since. Yet here was Bramble, trembling. "Hey," Ivy whispered, placing a gentle hand on his back. That was when it happened. The moment her skin met his fur, Bramble flinched not dramatically, but with the sharp, involuntary jolt of something pulled too hard from the past. She froze. And suddenly, in the quiet, something clicked into place, not in Bramble, in her. That tremble, that stillness, that refusal to move and not fear. Not confusion, memory. She stood, moving quickly now, descending to the study. Her fingers worked in rhythm, flicking through file boxes, papers, old manila folders half-charred from a previous fire Vale had claimed was accidental. She pulled a stack of service logs from the previous district, Whitlock had requested them during an earlier investigation into Vale's housing projects. Most were routine: sanitation, plumbing, pest control. But there, near the bottom of the pile, tucked inside a dispatch report from 8 years ago, she found it. Subject: Unit K9 Bramble, failed recovery operation, case 113X. Her hands shook as she pulled the folder open. Inside, a single-page summary, redacted heavily. The details were scarce, but the story bled through. Location: Fairview Elementary, 2015. Report summary: suspected abduction of minor from school grounds during winter storm lockdown. Multiple units dispatched. K9 Bramble tracked scent through basement tunnels to an old janitorial passage, Screams reported. Entry delayed due to structural instability. By the time clearance was given, the tunnel had collapsed. No body recovered. Victim: name withheld. Age 6. Presumed deceased. Bramble had been found days later, still in the rubble. Paws bloodied, muzzle torn from clawing at debris. Unwilling to leave the last place her scent had been, Ivy pressed the page to her chest. A 6-year-old girl. A cry in the dark. And now, years later, another girl. Same age. Same soft breathing behind a wooden door. No wonder he hadn't barked. No wonder he hadn't moved. He remembered. She climbed the stairs again, this time slower. At the top, she sat beside him, saying nothing. Bramble's gaze finally shifted toward her, not all the way, just enough. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I didn't know you carried this." His breath caught, one of those half sighs that animals make when they can no longer hold something in, but still refuse to break. And then his head lowered slowly, just enough to rest against her knee. The house made a noise again, distant and deep. The kind of sound Ivy had come to associate with truth. "You don't have to claw through it alone," she whispered, fingers threading gently through the fur on his neck. "Not this time." And then quietly, from the attic, Lily stirred. A soft murmur, a rustle of fabric, a child's hand sliding to the crack beneath the door, as if reaching toward something unseen. Bramble didn't flinch this time. He only leaned forward, pressed his nose to the wood, and stayed there breathing in, steady now. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close. A bridge between past and present. A whisper from below floorboards that maybe just maybe not all cries go unanswered forever. The morning fog hadn't lifted when Arthur Vale stepped out into the corridor. He moved like a man who had spent years learning to hide his rage beneath civility, but this morning, there was a crack in the mask. Bramble was curled by the attic door again, body pressed low to the wood, ears alert but not twitching. He had stayed there most nights now, as if he were guarding something only he could sense. Perhaps, in a way, he was. Vale's shoes clicked sharply as he approached. The sound didn't startle the dog, but it did cause the silence to thicken. "I thought I told them," Vale murmured to himself, voice low, acidic. He crouched, just a little too slow to seem natural, his face hovering inches from Bramble's. "What are you doing here again, mutt?" Bramble didn't growl, but he didn't move either. His stare held firm, unblinking, like a statue carved from war memory. Vale's hand hovered, uncertain, then retreated. He turned toward the narrow attic staircase. Locked. Of course. His fingers flexed at his sides as he stood, face hardening. "Too many secrets in this house lately," he muttered. "And I don't like secrets." By noon, the call had been made. 2 men arrived from the city shelterone. Young, nervous, the other older and seasoned, with eyes that didn't ask questions. They wore municipal jackets and clipped voices. "Large breed, potentially aggressive," Vale told them, arms crossed. "He's been loitering near restricted areas. Might be a hazard to the children." Whitlock, returning from the garden path, caught sight of the scene just as the handlers began approaching Bramble with a looped leash and tranquilizer gun in hand. "Wait, what the hell is going on?" Vale didn't flinch. "You've grown far too lenient with protocol, officer. This animal's behavior has been erratic. For everyone's safety, he's being removed." Bramble stood now, but his body was tight with confusion, not aggression. His tail was lowered, ears back, but he didn't retreat. His eyes flicked from Ivy, who had just emerged from the hallway, to Whitlock. "Don't do this," Ivy said sharply, stepping forward. "He's not just a dog, Arthur. He's an officer." "Don't be ridiculous," Vale cut in. He's not your partner. He's a liability." The younger handler hesitated, but the older one took a step forward. "Easy, boy. Let's make this smooth." They moved too fast. The moment the loop of the leash came too close to Bramble's neck, something ancient and wounded inside him snapped. He didn't lunge but he turned, fast, and bit. The handler cried out, stumbling back as blood welled from his forearm. Bramble froze the moment it was done, as if realizing too late. His breathing hitched eyes wide, almost childlike in regret. Whitlock shouted, moving to block further escalation, but it was too late. The older handler raised the tranquilizer rifle, fired without hesitation. The dart struck Bramble's flank. He staggered, legs buckling. Ivy dropped to her knees beside him as his body began to still, breath coming in frightened pants. "Easy, baby. You're okay," she whispered, fingers trembling as she cradled his heavy head in her lap. Bramble's eyes, those same dark eyes that had once scanned battlefields, looked up at her, and for a brief, unbearable second, they looked like a child's. Then they closed. The handlers lifted him gently, not like a threat anymore, but like a burden they didn't quite understand. Whitlock stood, fists clenched, jaw tight. "Where are you taking him?" "City pound for evaluation," the older handler said. "Bite protocol requires a 10-day hold. Depending on the report, well, you know how it goes." "No," Ivy said softly. "You don't get to decide how it goes." But they were already moving, already gone. Vale stood by the banister, calm as stone. "Consider it a lesson in boundaries," he said, voice cold. "Both for you and for your mutt." The front door closed, and the silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was mourning. That evening, the house felt wrong, like someone had turned down the volume on all its heartbeats. Lily, hidden in the attic crawlspace, sensed it too. She asked Ivy in a whisper, "Where's the dog?" Ivy couldn't answer right away. She just sat there beside the small mattress, brushing hair from Lily's forehead. "He's resting," she finally said. "But he'll come back. He always finds his way back." But her voice cracked on the last word. Whitlock stood by the window that night, eyes fixed on the empty road. His knuckles rested on the frame like he was steadying himself for impact. "We need to move faster," he said quietly. "Vale knows something's off. He's cutting off the pieces that don't fit." Ivy nodded, sitting on the couch, arms wrapped around herself like armor. "We need Bramble back." "She needs him. We all do." Down the hall, the attic door remained closed, but the scent of the dog still lingered in the wood. And if one pressed an ear to the floorboards above, they might have heard it. A child's breath, slow and fragile, waiting for the return of a silent guardian. And somewhere beneath the haze of sedation, in a sterile metal cage surrounded by strangers, Bramble dreamed of footsteps, small ones, bare feet padding across old wood, and a voice, whispering his name like it mattered. He twitched. He remembered. The rain tapped gently on the attic skylight, like soft fingers urging them forward. The low glow from a single lamp cast long shadows across the uneven wooden floor, where Ivy, Whitlock, and Miss Harrow sat in a quiet circle. No voices were raised, no grand declarations, only the kind of silence where hearts beat louder than words. Lily was asleep curled like a kitten beneath an old patchwork quilt, thumb resting near her lips, breath light. She hadn't spoken since Bramble was taken. The moment the handlers dragged him out, she had gone quiet, as if something vital had been ripped from her chest. Ivy had watched from the hallway, her nails digging into the soft flesh of her palm, helpless. Bramble's soft growl and final whimper still echoed in her ears. "She's not safe here," Whitlock whispered, unfolding a torn map across his knee. "If Vale's starting to circle, it won't be long before he finds her. We have to move her." "To where?" Ivy's voice was hoarse. "There's no place safe from him." "There's my cousin," Miss Harrow offered. Her voice trembled. "Elena. She's a nurse in Portland. Works night shifts. Doesn't ask questions. She's the one who helped my sister disappear after her ex turned dangerous." Whitlock glanced at Ivy. "We could get her there." "How?" Ivy whispered. "We're being watched. You think Vale won't notice a 6-year-old girl slipping out of the manor in the middle of the night?" "We staged something," Whitlock replied. "A plumbing emergency. Harrow calls for a service crew. We hide Lily in the tool cart. No one looks twice at a handyman's dolly. Ivy gave a hollow laugh. That's your plan? Stuff a traumatized child into a rolling crate? No, Whitlock said gently. Only if she agrees. Only if she's ready. Ivy looked toward the corner of the attic, where Lily's small form lay motionless. She's not ready. Not without him. They all knew who him meant. Since the moment Lily had been found, Bramble had become more than a dog. He was her shadow, her safety net. The one she whispered to when she couldn't bear speaking aloud. He slept by her door, tail curled, ears twitching at the smallest sound. And when they'd taken him, she hadn't cried. She'd simply shut down. She won't go without Bramble, Ivy said quietly. Then we get him back, Whitlock murmured. Miss Harrow blinked. You mean break him out? Whitlock didn't answer immediately. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, Bramble's intake log. The shelter transferred him to Ridgeview K-9 Control. It's halfway to Ashbury. Tight security, surveillance, motion lights, but it's not impossible. I know that place, Miss Harrow whispered. I used to volunteer there in the summers, before they privatized. You think Elena could take both of them? Ivy asked. Lily and Bramble? Miss Harrow nodded. She'd do it. No questions. But it has to be soon. Below them, a floorboard creaked. Ivy instinctively placed her hand over the lamp, dimming it. All three froze, hearts thudding. After a long moment's silence again, just the steady rhythm of the rain. Ivy stood and walked to the mattress, knelt beside Lily. The child's eyes were open now, staring at nothing. In the faint light, her lashes glittered with unshed tears. I heard you, Lily whispered. You want to send me away. Ivy felt her heart twist. Only if it's what you want. I don't want to go without Bramble. Ivy brushed a curl from Lily's cheek. He's not gone. We're going to find him. Lily sat up slowly. He doesn't like cages. His paws shake. He doesn't bark, but he whimpers, like the sound Mama made. When she thought I was sleeping, the attic seemed to pull in tighter, like the walls themselves were holding breath. Ivy glanced at the others, then gently took Lily's hands in hers. We're going to bring him back, she said, and then we'll all go together. Lily looked up at her. Promise? I promise. It was a fragile thing, that word promise, but in Lily's eyes, it carried weight. Ivy could feel it sink between them like a root taking hold. Whitlock gathered the map, his voice quiet. We leave tomorrow night. I'll find someone to forge the transport documents. Harrow, you call the plumber. Ivy get Bramble. Ivy didn't flinch. I'll get him. As they stood, the rain turned to mist against the windows. Outside, Vale's Manor slumbered beneath its veil of power and pretense. But upstairs, in the quiet hush of forgotten spaces, something stronger than defiance was forming. A girl who wouldn't leave without her dog. A dog who remembered what it was like to lose a child. And a promise made in the dark, held between trembling hands, that would either save them or shatter what little hope remained. It was the kind of night that felt like a breath held too long ere thick with the ache of what was coming. The shelter gates groaned under the strain of storm, wind, and rust. Somewhere beyond the cages, Bramble lay curled in the far corner of a cold pen, his side rising in ragged rhythm. A shallow pant. A bandage clung loosely to his front leg, already soaked through with blood from the sedative injection earlier. But his eyes were wide open, and they were listening. A child's cry had stirred something ancient in him the night before echoes of a van, a siren, a voice screaming, "My baby, please," and hands that didn't let go fast enough. It hadn't been his failure, but it had been his to carry. Now, Bramble rose with a low groan. Pain laced through his joints like wires, but he moved anyway, steady, deliberate. A whisper of something had reached him on the wind earlier. A voice, a scent, a child, Lily. He pressed his weight into the wire mesh until it bent, just enough. The latch gave way with a click. No bark, no drama. Just one dog, too old for second chances, limping into the dark. Ivy was washing her hands when the silence changed. It wasn't that the house suddenly grew quiet. Whitlock had already left for the night, and Miss Harrow had retired hours ago. It was the absence of her silence that unnerved her. The usual hush from the attic above, where Lily had fallen asleep against an old quilt, was suddenly replaced by movement. A floorboard, soft but deliberate. And then another sound lighter. A shoe. Ivy's heart lurched. No one should be upstairs. She didn't call out. Instead, she moved toward the hallway, her body tight as a bowstring. On the second step, she froze. There it was again. A pause. Then the low creak of the attic door being eased open. Arthur Vale hadn't expected to find much. But in his line of work, you didn't climb the ladder without following your Guten. His gut had been restless since that damn dog started sleeping by the attic. He told himself it was probably Miss Harrow hiding a stray. Or perhaps a patient Ivy was treating off the books. Something foolish, not sinister. Still, he had taken the master key from the old safe before dinner. Now, standing in the attic doorway, Vale let the flashlight beam dance across the rafters. It landed on the cot. And the child. A small shape buried in blankets, shoulders trembling not from cold, but from knowing. Who the hell? Vale stepped in, voice low, deadly. Lily's eyes opened wide, not with confusion, not even with fear, but with recognition. You're the bad one, she whispered. Her voice was scratchy from sleep and secrets. The one who made Mama cry. His face shifted, then something hard behind his calm. He raised the flashlight, maybe to blind her, maybe to grab her. That's when it came. The howl. Not a bark, not a warning. A sound pulled from marrow. Wounded, primal, and desperate. It cut through the walls like light through cracks in old wood. Arthur turned. What the? A blur of fur and blood burst through the attic stairs. Bramble, limping, mouth red, eyes fixed. His entire body, a message written in muscle and memory. You will not take her. He didn't wait for command or permission. He collided with Arthur with the force of a storm. They crashed into the wooden shelves, sending jars clattering, glass breaking. Lily screamed. Arthur scrambled, swearing, pulling something silver from his Kawada syringe. Sedative. Bramble lunged again, teeth snapping inches from Arthur's hand. Back, you mangy mutt. No. Ivy was at the top of the stairs now, eyes blazing. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the coat rack from the hall, swung it hard. It cracked across Arthur's back. He stumbled. Then everything paused. Arthur turned toward her, panting, red, blooming under his collar. You've made a terrible mistake, he hissed. And then another sound, a growl. Not Bramble's this time. From the shadows behind Ivy, Miss Harrow stepped out. Her hands were trembling, but her voice wasn't. She's not yours, Arthur. She never was. Outside, the storm rolled in like judgment. Inside, Lily crawled forward, hands shaking, toward Bramble, his side heaving, a fresh wound on his haunch, but his eyes still holding hers. You came back, she whispered. He didn't move, just breathed, slow and steady, as if he had nothing left to prove. Ivy knelt beside him, brushing glass from his fur, her hand lingering over his pulse. Still strong, still there. I don't understand, she said softly. Miss Harrow closed her eyes. He was part of the Jennings case. Years ago. The child they couldn't save. He never stopped listening for her cries. Never stopped blaming himself. Ivy's throat closed. And now, Harrow added, voice breaking, he's found one more. In the distance, the red lights of a security truck approached. Someone had triggered the perimeter alarm. Whitlock would stall them, maybe. But they had minutes. Bramble tried to rise, fell, tried again. Don't, Ivy whispered. You've done enough. But he looked at Lily, and she looked at him. I won't go without him, she said. And in that moment, no law, no doctor, no man with a badge could have made her. Because sometimes what saves us isn't the strongest one in the room. Sometimes it's the one that limps back through fire and pain just to howl one last time. The study, once cold and stale like a forgotten mausoleum, now pulsed with something sharper, something alive and dangerous. Arthur Vale stood in the doorway, backlit by the hall light, casting a long shadow that split the room like a fault line. In his trembling hand, a pistol, not raised yet, but not lowered either. Whitlock instinctively stepped in front of Lily. Ivy moved slower, her hands subtly shielding Miss Harrow behind her. No one spoke. Arthur's voice came low and cracked, like it had been burning through his throat for days. She's mine. Lily didn't flinch. She stood just behind Whitlock's leg, her small fingers curled tightly in his coat. Her lips were pressed shut, but her eyes were wide, watching everything. "You don't get to decide that," Whitlock said quietly. "Not anymore." Arthur took one step into the room. "You think you have proof? You think anyone's going to believe a disgraced detective, a nurse, and an old woman with a guilty conscience over me?" He let out a laugh, dry, hollow. "I built this town. This entire estate breathes because of me. They won't listen to you." "You falsified her records," Ivy said. Her voice wasn't loud, but steady, like a blade sliding from its sheath. "You erased her mother. You claimed guardianship under a dead man's signature. That's not fatherhood. That's a cover-up." Arthur turned toward her then, and for a moment the mask cracked. His eyes, sharp but unfocused, settled on Ivy's face, then darted to Lily. "You don't understand," he said, voice thinning. "She was never supposed to exist, Leona. She wouldn't listen. She was weak. And then she was gone." Miss Harrow let out a broken noise, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Arthur didn't look at her. Bramble was the first to move. From the corner, near the stairwell, a soft growl rose, a low, pulsing hum of fury held tight beneath bruised ribs. His body was torn, blood still matted in the fur along his haunches. But his eyes, those sad, steady eyes, locked on Arthur, with a kind of knowing older than words. Arthur stepped back. "Get that animal away from me," Lily whispered. "He's not an animal." The gun twitched. In that moment, something flickered in Arthur's face. Not rage, not guilt, but something older. Recognition. A memory, maybe. Something buried. Whitlock raised both hands slowly. "You're cornered, Arthur. We know what you did. Lily isn't a secret you get to keep locked in an attic." "Then what?" Arthur snapped. "What happens to me? You turn me in, and she ends up in some system, passed around until she forgets who she is?" He looked at Lily again, and something bitter curled his mouth. "She's safer here. She needs to be here." "No," Ivy said. "She needs to be free. Not hidden, not claimed. Loved, yes, but not by someone who controls her through silence." Arthur's hand trembled. The gun dipped for a second, and Bramble moved. Not to attack, not to pounce. Just a steep-hone, deliberate paw forward, and then he sat, right between Arthur and Lily. The growling stopped, replaced by something quieter. The way Bramble looked at Arthur wasn't vicious. It was tired, wounded, as if he was done fighting and simply waiting. Waiting for Arthur to make a choice. Lily reached out, touched the back of Bramble's neck with her tiny fingers. "He remembers things, even when it hurts," she whispered. "Do you?" Arthur's face crumpled. For 1 second, his breath caught like a child about to cry, but it never came. He looked down at the weapon in his hand, then up again. That moment passed. He raised the gun. Miss Harrow screamed. Ivy lunged forward. Bramble barked a single, thunderous note that shook the chandelier above, but the gun never fired. Whitlock, calm and coiled, had already stepped forward. His hand closed around Arthur's wrist with a sharp twist. The gun clattered to the floor. Arthur fell with it, knees buckling like someone whose strings had been cut. There was no struggle, no more words. Only the sound of Bramble breathing rough and raspy. Lily sank down beside him, curling her arms around his neck. Miss Harrow collapsed onto the couch, shaking. Ivy stood over Arthur, who was staring at the floor now as if it might open up and consume him. Whitlock knelt and picked up the gun, setting the safety. "You're going to tell them everything," he said to Arthur. "Not just about Lily, about Leona, about what happened the night she disappeared. And if you don't—" "I will," Miss Harrow interrupted. Her voice was hoarse but certain. "I will tell them all." Outside, the wind scraped softly against the window panes. Somewhere in the distance, a police siren cried out, faint but drawing closer. And in the center of the room, a little girl rested her cheek against a German shepherd's shoulder. His coat was still wet with blood, but his eyes were closed now. For the first time in days, Bramble was still. Not because it was over, but because Lily was safe. The air held its breath. For a suspended second, no one moved. Ivy's hands froze in front of Lily's shoulders, as if she could shield her by sheer will. Whitlock's jaw tensed. eyes flicking from the trembling muzzle of Vale's pistol to the distance between them and the door. Lily, clutching the edge of Ivy's coat, had gone silent, her body rigid, her eyes wide, pupils blown like a frightened deer caught in headlights. There was no room for sound, no space for a cry. Only Vale moved. He tightened his grip on the gun, his voice a low snarl. "She's mine," he hissed. "You all think you're noble? Bleeding hearts playing heroes? She would have died in the woods if it weren't for me. She owes me her life." "No one owes you, Arthur," Ivy said quietly. "Not her, not Leona, not Bramble." His face twitched at the name. From the hallway, a low guttural sound cut through the silence. A sound not of threat, but of something older. DePera grief wound tight with fury. It wasn't bark or growl or whimper. It was something caught in between. It was Bramble, bleeding, fur-matted, limping hard on his front leg. He appeared like a ghost from the shadows. His head was low, ears flat. A line of red streaked his right flank. But his eyes, those eyes that had seen too much, had waited too long, locked straight on to Lily. Vale turned just as the dog made his move. There was no hesitation, no calculation, just a blur of brindle and breath, a burst of pure instinct and love unchained. The gun fired. The crack split the room like thunder on a dry plain. Lily screamed. Bramble didn't stop. His body twisted midair, a ripple of muscle against pain. The bullet grazed him a bloom of crimson near the shoulder, but he kept going, teeth bared, jaws open. His full weight crashed into Vale's chest, slamming him backwards into the wall. The gun fell with a dull clatter across the floor. Vale shouted, the sound choked by Bramble's weight, pressing him down, teeth inches from his face, a snarl rattling in the dog's throat like distant war drums. Whitlock didn't wait. In 2 strides he was at the weapon. His foot came down hard on it, kicking it across the room. He reached Vale in a blur, dragging him out from under Bramble with brute force, twisting his arm behind his back until a sickening pop sounded. "You're done," Whitlock growled. "It's over." Vale writhed, breath wheezing, pinned now not just by Bramble's fury, but by the weight of every lie, every name he'd stolen, every truth he buried. Bramble stepped back, one paw trembling. He swayed once, then sathered. His chest rose and fell, each breath a wince. Lily was already beside him. She wasn't crying. She didn't scream. She just knelt beside Bramble, hands small and shaking as they found his bloodied side. "Why'd you come back?" she whispered. "Why didn't you run?" The dog pressed his nose against her forehead, a motion so gentle it hurt to watch. And then he did something he hadn't done since the day he arrived at the manor. He wagged his tail. Barely, just once. A soft thump against the floor like a heartbeat returned. Whitlock was calling for backup. Ivy was kneeling beside Lily now, helping press her scarf against Bramble's shoulder.
"Miss."
Harrow appeared at the door, her face white, her lips murmuring prayers to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. But Lily was the still point, her cheek against Bramble's head, whispering soft things no one else could hear. "You remembered," she said. "Even with the cages, even with the men and the trucks, you remembered me." Bramble blinked slowly, eyes softening, the wildness in them quieting. He did remember. Not just the attic door, not just the voice, but the reason, the girl in the darkness. The cry that never left his memory. The mission he had failed once and had vowed, in the only way a dog can vow, to never fail again. Ivy looked at the blood staining her scarf. It was bad, but not fatal. A through and through, she prayed. She met Whitlock's eyes, and in them was the same unspoken thing. Bramble saved them, saved her. Vale had stopped struggling. His breath was ragged, rage deflated into something like shamir, the closest thing a man like him could feel. "You don't get to rewrite this one," Ivy said, standing. "The truth's out, and this time the truth bites." Sirens were already growing in the distance, the quiet kind, the ones reserved for internal calls, for when institutions collapse from the inside. Lily stayed beside Bramble, stroking the space between his ears. Her lips moved, counting under her breath. It was something she did when she was scared. Bramble let her. His weight leaned into her like a wall, finally able to fall against something safe. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the trees that surrounded the estate, like witnesses finally allowed to exhale. Inside, the shadows softened, and Bramble, wounded, trembling, still breathing, closed his eyes. Not from pain, from peace. There are moments when time does not slow at fractures. The night air outside the Harrow estate was thick with the taste of copper and fear. Rain tapped against the windows like fingers trying to get in, and in the flickering hallway light, Bramble lay still, blood matting the fur along his ribs. His chest rose barely, his eyes flickering between shadow and light. Lily was crumpled beside him, arms flung around his neck as if she could keep him tethered to this world with nothing more than the will of a child's heart. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just whispered, "You came back." The words trembled from her lips like a breath she had been holding for years. Her tiny fingers dug into his mane, and his ear flicked. Weak, but deliberate, in response. It was the first movement he'd made since the gunshot. The hallway smelled of gunpowder and sweat. Whitlock stood over Vale, hand shaking as he kept the disarmed weapon pointed at the floor, chest heaving. Vale had stopped struggling more out of shock than surrender, his lip split, his temple bleeding where Bramble had struck him into the wall. Sirens wailed somewhere in the valley below, growing louder, closer. The sound bounced between the trees like a promise. Justice is coming. Ivy leaned against the banister, dialing again, though she didn't need to. Her call had gone through 10 minutes earlier before Vale had cornered them, before the gun had even been drawn. Her voice had cracked when she told the dispatcher the truth. "His name is Arthur Vale. There's a child. There's been a cover-up. Please, please hurry." And now, the blue and red lights pulsed through the trees like a heartbeat. Outside, tires sloshed through the gravel. Doors slammed. Voices called. The first officer entered with a flashlight drawn and a hand at his belt. Whitlock raised both arms slowly, the gun already on the floor. "She's upstairs," he said hoarse. "The girl. And the dog. He's the reason she's alive." Another beam of light caught Vale's face, drained of color, eyes distant. "I am the guardian of this estate," he muttered. "You're making a mistake." But no one answered him. They moved past him, not around past, like he wasn't even worth stepping around. They followed the thread of blood across the floor, the path Bramble had taken, the same hall he'd once patrolled quietly at night, unseen, unheard. When they found Lily still curled beside him, 2 paramedics dropped to their knees without a word. One of them placed a hand on her shoulder, gently trying to lift her. "He's my dog," she whispered. "He needs help," the medic said kindly. "Then help both of us." Bramble blinked slowly. His breath rattled. "I'm not leaving him." The second medic looked at the first, then nodded. "Then we won't either." They worked quickly. Pressure on the wound. Morphine. Stabilizing the leg. Lily never moved from his side. Even when they lifted him onto the stretcher, she walked beside it, one hand resting gently on his side. Outside, Vale was in cuffs. A female officer, calm but firm, read him his rights as the others searched the estate. Miss Harrow was brought out from the study, her face pale but resolute, the sealed envelope Ivy had found earlier clutched in her hands. "This is Leona's medical file," she said to the officer. "It proves Lily is hers, and mine. I was there when she gave birth." "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Miss Harrow's voice cracked. "Because I was afraid. Because I let him silence me once. I won't let it happen again." The officer nodded, softer now. "We'll take this as evidence. You've done the right thing." Lily, standing nearby, looked up as Miss Harrow approached her and gently cupped her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything I didn't say. For everything I didn't do." Lily didn't speak, but her small hand reached up and covered Miss Harrow's, just for a moment. That was enough. Bramble whimpered softly from the stretcher. Whitlock stepped forward, placing a hand on Lily's back. "We'll follow the ambulance. I've got a friend at the county clinic. They'll take care of him." "And Lily?" Ivy asked. "I've spoken to my cousin," Ivy said, her voice quiet but sure. "She's a nurse in Portland. Has a spare room, knows how to listen. We can get her there, safely." Another officer joined them. "You'll need to come down to the station, give a full statement." "We will," Whitlock said. "Just not tonight." The officer nodded. "Tonight's for survival." They watched as the ambulance pulled away, Lily seated inside, one hand resting lightly on Bramble's paw. The estate faded behind the mitts, secrets bleeding into the night, finally exposed. And in the hush that followed, Whitlock exhaled for the first time in days. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the small-town animal hospital, mingling with distant murmurs and the occasional bark. A pale winter sun filtered through frosted windows, casting gentle stripes of light across the cold linoleum floor. Bramble lay curled in a recovery crate lined with wool blankets, his flank wrapped in gauze. His breaths came slow and heavy. One hind leg, twisted at the joint, wouldn't respond despite the vet tech's patient coaxing. A deep wound on his shoulder had been stitched shut, the fur around it shaved raw. He never whimpered not during surgery, not when they told Ivy his mobility might never fully return. But his eyes, steady and sorrowful, held a pain older than the gunshot. Dr. Mason, the gray-haired vet with bark-like hands and a cloth-soft voice, had done all he could. "He's a fighter," he told Ivy, patting her shoulder gently. "But the leg, it may never be the same. Dogs can adjust. It's their hearts we have to watch." Snow fell quietly outside as the days passed. Every morning, as visiting hours began, Lily arrived coat buttoned to the chin, boots too big, mittens still damp. In her pocket, a wrinkled tissue wrapped around bits of cooked chicken Ivy smuggled from the kitchen. She didn't say much, just pulled a chair close to Bramble's kennel and waited until his eyes found hers. "I'm here," she whispered. "You came back for me, so now I come back for you." Bramble stirred, ears twitching faintly. Lily smiled. By 9:01 every morning, Lily sat cross-legged by the glass. Sometimes she read from old children's books. Other times she hummed lullabies her mother once sang. When Bramble struggled to move, she was there not with pity, but with quiet presence, as if to say he was still worth fighting for. One afternoon, Ivy crouched beside her niece, dark circles beneath her eyes. When Bramble lifted his head just an inch at Lily's voice, Ivy blinked back tears. "Some dogs lose their legs and run like they've got wings," Ivy murmured. "And some keep all four but never heal in here." She tapped her chest. "Bramble's not broken," Lily said firmly. "No," Ivy agreed. "He's just different now. Like us." By week's end, Bramble tried to stand. Twice he failed. On the third attempt, with Lily's hand pressed to the glass, he managed to lift himself halfway, tail thudding once against the crate floor. Outside, whispers about Arthur Vale's arrest spread through town. But in this small room, none of it mattered. Here, there was only truth earned and blood stitched. On the 10th day, Bramble wagged his tail when Lily said his name. On the 12th, Dr. Mason removed a bandage. "Another week or two, and we'll get him on hydrotherapy," he said. "He's got more grit than most Marines I've met." By the 14th morning, Lily dared to ask, "Can he come home, doctor?" Mason glanced at Ivy, then at Miss Harrow, who had brought tea and an envelope of donations labeled, "To the dog," with sad eyes. "I think home is exactly what he needs if you're ready," he said. "We're ready," Lily replied, without hesitation. That evening, as twilight filled the quiet corridors, Bramble turned his head toward the door, as if sensing home drawing near. A low breath left him not a cry, but peace. The cottage wasn't grand. Peeling shutters, a crooked porch, a leaning chimney, but to Lily, it was magic. "It's not much," Ivy said softly, keys trembling in her hand. Lily inhaled the scent of pine and old toast. "It smells like home," she whispered. They had moved in just 2 days before. Miss Harrow lived down the lane in a lavender-scented farmhouse, and Whitlock retired now tended a small barn behind hers. His dog Jasper trotted the trails each morning like a messenger of calm. Lily's room was small but hers, a sunlit corner with slanted ceilings, a shelf of old books, and a bear-shaped nightlight. The first night, Ivy found her crying quietly, whispering Bramble's name like a prayer. "Do you think he's lonely?" Lily asked one morning. "No," Ivy said, placing a thermos of cocoa beside her. "He knows you're thinking of him. He's resting. That's what brave dogs do after big adventures." "I miss his eyes," Lily murmured. "They were like when someone says nothing, but you still feel safe." Ivy's throat tightened. Bramble had carried Lily's fear through that attic. Now Lily carried his pain in the curve of her spine. "I was thinking," Ivy said carefully, "we might build a ramp at the back entrance. Stairs might be too hard for him now." Lily's eyes lit up. He's coming here? Well, he doesn't have a home anymore either, Ivy said. Maybe we could all start over. Together. Lily hugged Ivy tightly, like someone who'd finally found an anchor. Days found their rhythm. Lily painted the ramp blue with paw prints. She started school down the road, walked there by Miss Harrow. On weekends, they baked bread with Whitlock, Bramble's old collar resting beside the recipe book, a quiet symbol of loyalty. The cottage began to feel less like a place and more like a heartbeat. The back door stayed slightly ajar, just in case Bramble came home early. Some might call it foolishness. Ivy called it faith. Lily called it love. It was an afternoon that made time forget itself. Sunlight filtered through pine needles, and the air smelled faintly of blossoms. Behind the cottage, Lily ran barefoot across the soft grass, laughter rising like a startled bird. Under the great elm, Bramble lay with his front legs crossed, scarred ribs rising and falling. He no longer flinched at every sound. His tail thumped when Lily twirled and collapsed beside him. "You're supposed to be resting," she whispered, stroking his neck. "But I know you hate missing the sun." A breeze stirred the porch chimes. From the kitchen, Miss Harrow hummed a lullaby, and Whitlock's cane tapped along the path. Retirement suited him now like a gate left open. Lily pressed her ear to Bramble's chest, listening to the rhythm that had once saved her. "I told them I wouldn't leave without you," she murmured. "And you didn't leave me either." He grunted softly, closing his eyes as her hand slowed. Petals drifted from the apple tree. For the first time in a long while, peace settled over them both. At the garden's edge, Ivy glanced up from the lavender and smiled at the sight of girl and dog curled together. "I used to think we were broken pieces," she had once told Miss Harrow, "but maybe we were just waiting for the right shape to fit into." And now, with Lily safe and Bramble healing, Ivy believed it. Bramble stirred as Lily whispered about the birds nesting in the barn rafters, naming the smallest one, Pip. He didn't answer, but his gaze stayed on hers, tail moving slightly when she rested her forehead against his. Sometimes, Ivy found Lily in the middle of the night, humming by Bramble's bed. Ivy never interrupted. Some things were too sacred. As evening came, Lily pointed to the sky. "That cloud looks like you," she laughed, but with big floppy ears. Bramble snorted, and her laughter rang out, no longer borrowed or broken, but fully hers. He shifted slowly, his back leg dragging, but he was there, breathing, being enough. As the sun dipped low, Lily lay beside him, whispering, "We're home now." And Bramble the dog with sad eyes, once broken, closed them at last, not in pain, but in peace. The fog that curled around the edge of the woods had started to lift, both outside and in. Summer came gently that year, in filtered light and the scent of damp pine. As if even the seasons knew the land had seen too much sorrow, Ivy stood on the stone steps of the cottage, the early sun warming her arms. In her hand was a small wooden sign, the words carved by a neighbor who had once worked with Whitlock during the Vale investigation. The letters weren't perfect, slightly crooked, a little uneven, but they held a reverence no machine could offer. Bramble's place. She ran a finger along the grooves. The wood was old pine, rescued from the beams of the estate's barn before it was torn down. Bramble had once slept under that barn, bleeding and forgotten, when the world turned its back. Now, his name would stand at the entrance of something new. Behind her, the cottage was quiet, except for the soft hum of a kettle and the rustle of Lily flipping pages in a worn book. The child had found her voice again, not all at once, but in fragments, like wildflowers returning to scorched earth. Some days she spoke only to Bramble. Other days, she'd laugh so loud the birds startled from the trees. Both were miracles in their own right. It had been Ivy's idea to turn the empty shed beside the cottage into something more. What began as a storage room was slowly becoming a sanctuary, not just for dogs, but for memory, for second chances. Whitlock, now officially retired, came by every morning with coffee and tools. He didn't talk much, but he didn't need to. He'd help build the fences, sand down old kennels donated by a neighboring town, or just sit beside Bramble and scratch the spot behind his ear that made the old dog's tail twitch like clockwork. Bramble, his coat was grayer now, thick around the muzzle. He moved slower, his hind leg dragging ever so slightly from the bullet that almost claimed him. But he still had that spark, that quiet, smoldering loyalty that never left. He didn't bark much, didn't chase. But when Lily walked outside, he always lifted his head, ears pricking, as if he could still smell the shadows before they arrived. That morning, Ivy nailed the wooden sign above the garden arch. It wasn't grand, just 2 beams joined in the shape of a doorway, twined with ivy and climbing roses. But when she stepped back to look at it, her chest ached in that way grief and hope often mix. She could still remember the night Lily whispered, "He came back." The words hadn't been just about Bramble. They were a lifeline, a naming of the unspoken. He came back. And because he came back, so did she. Now they gave that back, one rescued dog at a time. The first was a limping Labrador named Penny, pulled from a ditch after a hit and run. Then came Jasper, a German shepherd once bound for euthanasia after biting an abuser. And then Molly, half collie, half mystery, but full of gentleness. They didn't arrive all at once. They came like ghosts testing the light, one by one. Ivy let them move at their own pace. No leashes, no loud voices. Just space, warm blankets, and the kind of silence that said, "You're safe now." Bramble didn't mind. He would lie under the oak tree near the fence, tail thumping when the newer dogs approached. Sometimes he'd lift his nose to the wind and just listen. Ivy wondered if he remembered the cries of the shelter howls that spoke of things no one else heard. He never howled anymore, but once in a while, late at night, he'd sit by the window, eyes locked on the forest edge, and breathe out a sound that wasn't quite a whimper, not quite a growl, as if speaking to ghosts that still wandered out there, not yet sure they were allowed to rest. Inside the cottage, Ivy painted the hallway in soft earth tones. The spare room became a warm, quiet space with dog beds, medical supplies, and shelves of toys. On the wall above the fireplace hung a single-framed photo, Lily asleep in the grass, her hand resting on Bramble's shoulder, his eyes wide open, watching the world for her. It wasn't just a rescue, it was a covenant. By late afternoon, Miss Harrow arrived with warm bread and honey. She was older now, walking slower with her cane, but her voice still had that gentle firmness Ivy remembered from the shelter. She'd offered to help with training and daily care. Said it gave her something to wake up for. "Funny," she said, sipping tea on the back porch. "How we start places for them and end up saving ourselves." Ivy smiled, brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "It was never just for them, was it? No?" Miss Harrow looked out toward the yard where Lily was drawing shapes in the dirt. Bramble sat nearby, blinking slowly in the sun. "It never is." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting the yard in amber light, Ivy stood once more beneath the wooden arch. She traced the letters again Bramble's placing and whispered, "We're not done, old boy, but we're home." Inside, Lily giggled on of those real, belly-deep laughs that once seemed impossible. And under the tree, Bramble closed his eyes, resting his chin on his paws, a soft breath leaving his body like the final chord of a long song, the kind you carry with you, even after the music fades. It started with a single sentence, one clear, unshaken thread of sound that spilled from Lily's lips like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I want to bring Bramble to school one day." It was Ivy who froze at the table, mid-sip of her tea, the steam curling around her fingers. The morning had been quiet eggs over easy toast with too much jam, the smell of spring rain still clinging to the wooden shutters. But now, the world tilted slightly. She set her cup down with a gentle clink and turned to the little girl across from her. Lily didn't seem to notice the weight of what she'd just done. She was busy buttering toast, humming a quiet, tuneless melody. Ivy felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, slow and unashamed. "You spoke," she whispered. Lily looked up, smiling. "Bramble likes peanut butter." It was the second sentence. By the end of the week, the floodgates had opened. Not in overwhelming torrents, but in soft, steady ripples. She asked questions. She told Ivy her dreams. She called Miss Harrow Grandma by mistake and didn't correct herself. And one morning, when Whitlock stopped by to check on Bramble, who now limped with a noble stiffness but still managed to steal whole sausages, when Ivy wasn't looking, Lily sat on the porch steps and asked him if he missed being a detective. He did, and he told her so. At school, It took longer. The other children had learned to give her space. She was the quiet girl, the one who sat near the windows and always seemed to be drawing trees, or the shape of a dog's nose, or the moon in its different phases. But when Miss Ellery, the new school counselor, invited Lily to the front of the class for Hero Story Day, something shifted. She stood in her small boots, the sleeves of her sweater tugged over her hands, and looked out at the expectant faces. And then she spoke. "My name is Lily. I was lost once, for a long time. I didn't think anyone would come." Silence held the room like a breath not yet released. A boy in the second row, Elliot, who always brought extra crackers, tilted his head, listening. Lily swallowed and took a step forward. But someone did. He was big, with fur and golden eyes, and he didn't care that I couldn't talk. He knew I was scared and stayed anyway. Miss Ellery wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and didn't interrupt. He waited for me in the snow. He followed me into the dark. He got hurt, really bad. But he didn't stop, because I was his person. And I think I was his. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a worn photograph. It was a little bent, the corners curled from being taken out and put back in many times. It showed a girl, her smile lopsided, holding the head of a German shepherd with one arm wrapped tight around his neck. Bramble looked straight into the camera, regal, trusting. "This is Bramble," Lily said, lifting it. "He saved me. So now I talk, because I want people to know." Another pause. Then, slowly, small hands clapped. First, one child, then another, then the whole room. Not loud, not rowdy, but reverent. A circle of respect wrapped around the girl who had once lived in silence. When Ivy picked her up that day, Lily skipped toward her. "How did it go?" Ivy asked, brushing strands of windblown hair from Lily's cheek. "I told them," Lily said, her voice calm and clear, "about Bramble, about the woods, about Mr. Vale." Ivy crouched down to Lily's height. "Were you scared?" "No," Lily answered softly, "because it's true. And truth doesn't hurt when you're not alone anymore." That night, they sat on the porch together, Lily with her knees tucked under Ivy's shawl, and Bramble stretched at their feet, his ears twitching at moths in the dark. The stars blinked through branches, and somewhere far off, an owl called. Lily rested her head on Ivy's arm. "Do you think I can help other kids who feel lost?" "I think you already are," Ivy replied, and Lily smiled. Not a smile shaded by fear or uncertainty, but the kind of smile that blooms when a shadow is finally behind you. A week later, Miss Harrow invited Lily to help with her therapy dog group. Bramble, now officially retired, wore a red scarf and leaned into the hands of children who were still learning to speak, still learning to feel safe. He didn't need to run anymore. His gift now was presence. His gift was stillness. Lily sat beside him and read aloud a picture book about a brave dog who crossed a snowy forest to find the girl who had been taken. The children listened. One little boy, who hadn't spoken since his father left, reached out and touched Bramble's paw. Lily didn't say anything. She just nodded. Outside the window, the wind moved through the trees, and the laughter of children drifted through the halls. The girl who had once vanished was now a light for others. She had been found, and so had he. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across the forest floor, dappled through branches that had once whispered of loss but now rustled with life again. Summer was drawing near its close, and the woods, those very woods that once held secrets and sorrow, now brimmed with a quiet kind of peace. A narrow path curved through the trees, worn by time, feet, and paw prints. On that path walked a girl and a dog. Lily was taller now, nearly 12, with a quiet strength in her posture and that same steady gaze she'd carried since the night Bramble shielded her with his own body. Her voice had returned long ago, as soft and warm as spring rain. But today, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Bramble walked beside her. No leash between them, no command or cue. His steps were slower now. The silver in his coat had spread across his muzzle and down the ridge of his back like winter frost. His gait bore the memory of the bullet that had nearly ended him. His rear leg carried a slight limp, though he never let it stop him. They moved, as if tethered by something deeper than obedience. A rhythm, a bond, a silent vow, sealed in blood, years, and love. They paused at a clearing where the trees opened up to let the sky pour in. Lily lowered herself onto a patch of soft grass, leaning back on her hands. Bramble followed, folding into the earth with a soft groan, his body easing beside her with the trust of a lifetime. She reached for him, not to pet, not to praise, just resting her hand on the thick fur at his shoulder. They sat like that for a while. No words, just breath and wind and the occasional flutter of wings overhead. It had taken years to reach this kind of quiet, the kind where silence no longer meant fear, the kind where a girl could grow, where a dog could age without worry, where the past became a thread woven into the strength of today. Bramble tilted his head, ears twitching as he listened, not for danger now, but for the world itself. A squirrel scurrying across bark, the faint trickle of the stream beyond the rise, Lily's slow inhale beside him. His eyes, though clouded at the edges, remained bright when they met hers. "Still here," those eyes said. "Still yours." Lily smiled, not with the cautious smile of the child she once was, but with the full warmth of someone who knew what it meant to be lost, and more importantly, what it meant to be found. She remembered, even now, the weight of Bramble's body pressing against her when he leapt between her and Vale's gun, the way he'd trembled in her arms, the way she'd whispered, "You came back," over and over, as if willing him to stay. And he had. He stayed through surgeries, through sleepless nights and slow walks. He stayed when nightmares clawed at her dreams, and only the press of his head against her chest could bring her heart back down. He stayed through school plays, the first time she spoke in front of a class, the first time she laughed without crying after. He was there when she brought home the ribbon for her story, The Girl Who Was Found, and again when Ivy cried, reading it aloud to Miss Harrow and retired Officer Whitlock, who kept wiping his eyes and muttering, "Some dogs change the world, you know." And now, here he was, slower, older, but still Bramble, still hers. She lay back on the grass, arms spread wide, eyes to the sky. Bramble rose and, with effort, circled once before, curling beside her, his side pressed to hers like always. The sky above was that shade of blue that only came at the end of summer. Birds danced along its surface, free and unbothered. Lily spoke then, but only in a whisper. "Thank you." It wasn't for any one thing. Not just for the night he saved her life. Not just for the days that followed. It was a thank you for everything. For staying. For healing with her. For letting her be a child again when the world had tried to take that away. Bramble's tail thumped softly once against the grass. She reached over and brushed her fingers along his scarf, one just above his flank, now hidden under years of fur. A memory, a mark of pain, a badge of love. She had scars, some still visible, most not. But Bramble had never looked at her with pity, only knowing. And sometimes that's all healing required. A knowing heart, a silent presence, a soft bark when the world was too loud. Eventually, Lily sat up and brushed blades of grass from her shirt. Bramble stirred beside her, pushing himself to his feet with the slow dignity of age. She waited, always patient, then stood beside him. They didn't turn back yet. They just stood for a moment, letting the light wrap around them. When they did begin to walk again, it was without hesitation, side by side. No leash, no words, just the steady rhythm of feet and paws, the hush of trees swaying above, the path before them open and quiet and long. Somewhere in the distance, a breeze carried the faint sound of laughter from the cottagea child's voice. Maybe a new rescue playing in the field behind Bramble's place. Too. Lily looked down once more at her companion. "Ready?" she asked gently. Bramble didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the quiet bond between Lily and Bramble, we saw something unspoken, something sacred, a loyalty that never faltered, even when the world did. The truth is, dogs like Bramble don't ask for much. They don't need words, just a place beside you, a moment of trust, a hand that won't hurt. German shepherds, especially, carry a kind of silent nobility. They feel more than we know. They remember. And in that remembering, they stay long after others leave. Maybe that's why their love heals us in ways we don't even see coming. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt understood, you know exactly what I mean. And if you're looking for ways to connect more deeply with your Doge, especially one with a history or a past that needs gentleness, I recently found a little resource that might help. It's not fancy or loud, just kind. Thoughtful. If you ever want it, I'd be happy to share. Until then, give your dog a quiet hug tonight. They understand more than we think, and sometimes that's enough.